Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour. Government orders, government bills commons, consideration at second reading of Bill C-50, Canadian Sustainable Jobs Act.
Madame Laboutillier, pour Monsieur Wilkinson.
Ms. Leboutillier moves that Bill C-50, an act respecting accountability, transparency, and engagement to support the creation of sustainable jobs for workers and economic growth in a net zero economy, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Natural Resources.
Debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to stand today to start our debate on Bill C-50, an act respecting federal accountability, transparency, and engagement to support the creation of sustainable jobs for workers and economic growth for a net zero economy. By introducing legislation for sustainable jobs, the Government of Canada is providing strong leadership through good governance, strong accountability, and effective engagement. We are taking action through 5 key elements. The first element is to introduce guiding principles that ensure a cohesive approach to economic development and climate action, including measures to support workers and to help create sustainable jobs, all while aligning with international best practices and sending a strong signal to investors that Canada is ready to lead in an emerging clean growth industry world. The second element is to create a Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council tasked with providing independent annual advice to the Government of Canada and engaging with Canadians. This council will ensure that experts, including workers, Indigenous leaders and industry, and young people are at the table to guide governmental actions. The third element is a requirement to publish action plans every 5 years, informed by input from stakeholders and partners, as well as expert advice from the Partnership Council. The fourth is to create a Sustainable Jobs Secretariat to ensure coordinated action on the implementation of the Act across the federal government. And the fifth and final element is to designate responsible and specified ministers to carry out this legislation. Madam Speaker, much like the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, this legislation will help to ensure that the Government of Canada has every region of Canada and every Canadian worker at the centre of its policy and decision-making with respect to sustainable jobs. The Canadian Sustainable Jobs Act is an act that respects Canada's workers, regardless of the industry they work in, and is inclusive of Canadians of all stripes, no matter their background or where they live. Cette législation s'appuie.
This legislation builds on the progress we've made over several years as this government fostered significant growth in our clean energy industries and the other sectors that help us reach our emission reduction goals.
Neutralité. Depuis 2015, nous avons investi.
Since 2015, we've invested more than $120 billion in clean growth initiatives and committed to over $80 billion in tax incentives. If we'd taken the path some conservatives advocate, which is one of austerity and inaction, we would be putting Canadians and their communities at a massive disadvantage. Their head-in-the-sand approach ignores where investment dollars are flowing into natural resources, energy, buildings, transportation, heavy industry, and more.
An approach of inaction would be one that lets competing nations take leadership roles in the sectors and industries where Canada is a natural leader, letting them innovate and attract global investments while we wait and simply hope for the best. Such a reckless approach of inaction would be one that puts our economic well-being and our environmental stability at risk. But we're not going to let that happen. Instead, we're acting decisively. Whether it is this bill to ensure Canadian workers can seize economic opportunities in front of us, or C-49, which is helping to deploy an offshore wind industry in Atlantic Canada, or our historic budget investments that allowed us to compete with the US IRA and attract new job-creating sustainable investments. Initiatives that support the creation of sustainable jobs are happening across government. Canadians have an opportunity to take the lead in many fields, in jobs that play a key role in reducing energy consumption, like developing new green housing plans or retrofitting existing homes and buildings, or innovating in cutting-edge low-carbon technology. Ces activités créeront tous des emplois durables d'un océan.
These activities will generate sustainable jobs from coast to coast to coast, from a skilled laborer working at the Volkswagen plant in St. Thomas, Ontario, to installing heat pumps in Nova Scotia, to building the batteries of the future at Northvolt's new facility, which we announced yesterday in Quebec City.
Nous savons que de tels investissements sont essentiels pour soutenir la
We know that investments like these are critical to supporting the growth of Canada's economy and, in turn, sustainable jobs.
Development. We are also focused on building out the backbone of Canada's economy, namely Canada's electrical grid. The federal government is proud to support growing sustainable industries like renewable energy, hydrogen, nuclear energy. They're helping us to scale new technologies while delivering clean, reliable, and affordable power to Canadian homes and to industry. Canada's clean electricity advantage has helped us to land international investors like Northvolt, Umicore, Ford, and many others. We need to keep expanding our electricity system to attract investment, create sustainable jobs, and fight climate change. That's why we've invested to deploy job-creating clean energy projects, like the 47-megawatt wind farm we announced yesterday near Medicine Hat, Alberta, or the 45-megawatt Birchall Wind project in New Brunswick. These projects are helping to deploy more clean power to our grid every day. The Government of Canada is also investing to deliver clean power storage, like the 250-megawatt Oneida project being built with the Six Nations of the Grand River in Ontario. All of these projects include Indigenous leaders. This kind of work is critical to advancing economic reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Accordingly, an important commitment in this legislation is to create more meaningful, ongoing, respectful relationships with Indigenous peoples. We need more Indigenous peoples to lead business as directors, managers, and workers. Their skills, their knowledge, and their leadership are helping accelerate the fight against climate change, the modernization of our energy sector, and the development of sustainable jobs for Canadian workers, including in the energy space. As I mentioned earlier, we need a connected, affordable, reliable, and non-emitting grid to supply more electrical energy than ever before. Not only will it power our emerging sources of new energy, it will also become a standard part of heating our homes, powering our vehicles, and driving all types of industry. There are lots of jobs associated with this new era of clean power development. It's no wonder that the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, endorsed our Sustainable Job Plan and this bill. Their vice president endorsed our plan and said, the IBEW's almost 70,000 members in Canada are ready to help build the next generation of Canada's vital energy infrastructure to help us reach our net zero goals. The work being done to build out our grid, a job that's so massive that it must be tackled jointly by every level of government, will facilitate the growth of our nation's economy and our jobs, thanks to its status as a multi-trillion-dollar market. Madame la Présidente.
Madam Speaker, the 8 years of investments we've made across all of government have effectively steered us in a strong economic direction, a direction that is pro-worker and pro-jobs. As a government, we've made thoughtful choices that focus on sustaining and growing our economy and evolving our industrial sectors, so we have a real shot of taking a leadership role as countries jostle for success in the clean economy. The legislation we're here to discuss today is complementary to the billions in job-creating investments we've unlocked to date and to our climate action policies like the Price on Pollution and Net Zero Accountability Act. That act requires that we set targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and encourages transparency, accountability, and taking immediate action and ambitious action to meet those targets. Bill C-50 builds on this and on our clean industrial strategy outlined in Budget 2023. This solid foundation, Madam Speaker, has put Canada and its workforce in an enviable position compared to much of the world.
We're privileged because we live in a peaceful country that has a wealth of sustainable resources. Resources that demand a central role in whether or not we'll be able to reach our goal of net zero emissions by 2050. Resources that are abundant and diverse, that provide our workers and communities with opportunities that only come with concerted, determined shift towards a low-carbon future. As we focus on driving down the emissions that are fueling the climate crisis, we're equally determined to ensure that our young people have a bright future ahead of them in careers that help build a strong, sustainable, and prosperous economy. Both are possible, and they go hand in hand. As Sean Strickland, the Executive Director of Canada's Building Trades Union, has said, if you take climate change seriously, you must, by definition, be pro-worker. If the world wants more clean energy, and they do, let our talented workforce meet that demand. If the world wants more products made by cleaner manufacturing processes, let's attract the business that helps our workers fill that gap. The Royal Bank of Canada estimates that in this decade alone, just in the next few years, the global shift to a low-carbon economy will create up to 400,000 new Canadian jobs in fields where enhanced skills will be required. Some of these are because of action we are taking to partner with industry, communities, and others to pair talent with training. Last Monday in Edmonton, we announced support for over 20,000 new green jobs being supported by ESDC. Of that 400,000 jobs that require upskilling, a good percentage of those jobs are thanks to the sustainable development of our natural resources, which includes clean energy and hydrogen. There's no question that we're blessed with an abundance of resources, but to access the potential that they provide, we must also ensure our workforce is well equipped. That is exactly what this legislation does. During the many discussions that we have had in the lead up to this legislation, many of Canada's Indigenous leaders, provinces, territories, and local leaders have identified tangible opportunities to pursue the development of new industries. They're taking concrete steps to realize their economic future, and they're facing what much of the world sees as an enviable task of narrowing those options down to the top few that will create good-paying jobs and prosperity in their communities. Our existing resources and initiatives created an ideal footing for our interim sustainable jobs plan. The strengths of the plan are the concrete actions it contains, notably this legislation. There's also the start of a lot of work on 9 other federal actions that will have a positive impact on the number of good, sustainable jobs in every part of this country. I'd like to speak to some of those actions today with the time that I have left. First and foremost, I'll mention the call to establish new legislation, the one that we're debating today. It offers a framework that will allow us to take sound actions to address both the opportunities and challenges in the low-carbon economy, informed by ongoing engagement between government and Canada's workers, partners, and stakeholders, as well as Indigenous peoples. This legislation also puts accountability front and center by designating a lead minister to guide these efforts. This is accompanied by a requirement that the government publish 5-year action plans that Canadians can use to measure and judge our efforts, supported by regular reporting on our progress, because Canadians deserve nothing less. The legislation will also make good on another action item from the Sustainable Jobs Plan, the establishment of a Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council. This is an independent body that will provide advice to government on how it can best support the shift to a low-carbon economy. If we really want to give workers a voice, if we sincerely intend to empower them to influence the decisions that affect their jobs and their future, then we must create this council. Through these efforts, workers, their rural and remote communities, provinces and territories, Indigenous groups, industry, young people, academics, and others will be able to provide the Council and the federal government with invaluable advice as we continue to move ahead. What we're talking about is real-world perspectives and information from those individuals in the workplace who are experiencing the transformation of our economy. The Council will apply its own expertise to these lived experiences to provide independent, actionable advice on how to create good-paying, skilled, sustainable jobs for Canada's workers and ensure that workers have the supports that they need to succeed. Essentially, bringing workers, employers, and governments together to find solutions that work for real life. Some of my colleagues will go into more detail about the other elements in this legislation, like the commitment to releasing regular action plans and the Sustainable Jobs Secretariat that will be created to work across federal departments and agencies on those plans.
Madam Speaker, the Canadian Sustainable Jobs Act ensures that Canadian workers can expect a clear path forward. The actions we're taking here will help Canada to lead the economic race as our economy achieves net zero. This plan is built on the thoughts and experiences of thousands of Canadians over more than 2 years of engagement and consultation. I'd like to express our deep gratitude for their work and their interest in helping us to get this legislation right.
Cette législation. It was views like these that helped to build this strong bill that we have before us today. We even won endorsements of groups like the Canadian Labour Congress, who represent 3 million Canadian workers. They said that the plan and this bill is a big win for workers. We know that when workers win, so does Canada. This legislation is needed to ensure the interim plan can support workers today, while standing up the Partnership Council and Secretariat to ensure an ongoing process. When I speak about endorsements from the groups that have looked at this legislation, I wanted to also include the voice of the President of the Business Council of Alberta, who said, "The Sustainable Jobs Act represents an important opportunity for Canada to shape our future and create jobs by providing the resources that the world needs, including energy, food, and minerals." And also that the Act is a good step forward in helping equip Canadians with the skills and jobs for our future economy. Now, today it's up to us to make the smartest possible choices and to put in place a framework that commits our government to supporting workers as they seek to build the sustainable economy of the future. This bill reflects consultations with Indigenous peoples, with union members and new Canadians, with industry leaders and community advocates from every region of the country. We owe it to them and all Canadians to ensure that we are advancing a thoughtful plan to help them ensure our country succeeds and that we can access great careers for generations to come.
Madam Speaker, this legislation will be used to create social supports and expand training opportunities for all Canadian workers. It gives Canadian workers a guaranteed seat at the table and access to equal opportunities to secure and benefit from the jobs of the future. Like many of this government's initiatives, this legislation is based on the need to tackle head-on the greatest environmental challenge any of us has ever seen, while seizing once-in-a-lifetime economic opportunities.
Countries around the world know that we have two choices ahead of us. We can advance plans for the future that allow us to seize economic opportunities while fighting climate change. We can simply stick our heads in the sand and hope for the best. I sincerely hope that everyone in this House agrees to choose the first path, because as countries around the world race to seize economic opportunities ahead of us, we must also quickly pass C50. We need to keep working to ensure and build a sustainable future while securing abundant, sustainable jobs for future generations. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Comments. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my apologies. You will understand that I have a very difficult time believing the sincerity of the government in this, and that's a result of their constant retaliation against the natural resources sector. We saw this, of course, Madam Speaker, with C-48. We also saw this with C-69. We've seen this with the endless carbon tax after carbon tax after carbon tax, as well as emission standards, which they force industry to meet. This, Madam Speaker, of course, results in higher mental health, a larger mental health crisis among industry workers, higher suicide rates, perhaps even fueling the opioid crisis. But that's not even my question, Madam Speaker. My question is, Madam Speaker, with a $41 billion deficit, $2.1 trillion debt across Canada, with oil and gas making up 7.5% of the GDP, how are they going to replace the funds in the coffers from this dying industry that they have killed at a time where they're overspending as well?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, we know that natural resources are at the center of our future economy, and Canada is blessed with so many resources that the world is looking for. And that's why we're actually reaching agreements with other countries, for example, with Germany, with our memorandum on hydrogen, for example, with our recent agreement with Romania when it comes to nuclear power. We know that Canada has the expertise, and we have the workers to make those different clean energies industries a success. We are relying on their ingenuity to get us through to where we know we need to be, because as I mentioned, RBC has estimated that by the end of this decade, there will be 400,000 new jobs for Canadians. We know and we believe in Canadian workers. They've got the know-how, the go-to, and the energy to keep us forward. We're making the agreements with international countries to be able to make those jobs a reality.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech. I listened closely. In the most important part of the speech, she spoke about new jobs that would be created in new technology. Well, I think that this bill is actually aiming to retrain workers who are working in polluting, declining industries. And I haven't heard anything about that in my colleague's speech. So if Canada is really moving towards oil expansion, there won't be an energy transition. So there won't need to be a just transition for workers, because there will be jobs. So I find it very reductive to speak about jobs in new technologies. Yes, they need to be created on the basis of the principles of the just transition, but that means that there actually must be a declining industry. So how do we keep those workers active?
Secrétaire parlementaire.
Madame la Présidente, alors, comme j'ai dit...
Madam Speaker, as I said in my speech, sustainable jobs are part of exactly what we're doing to fight climate change. In this country, we're transitioning towards a net zero economy. That's important because that means that industries will be interested in having their operations in Canada. And we saw that even yesterday in Quebec with Northvolt, which is going to manufacture batteries. That represents 3,000 jobs. And that's not the only announcement we made. We see all over the place companies like Volkswagen Rio Tinto. Everyone is looking to see how we can create more net zero industry in Canada.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, New Democrats are going to continue to use our position in Parliament to push for a sustainable future rooted in clean technology and good paying union jobs. And we're not going to give up till this government delivers. You know, although we welcome this legislation, you know, under the Liberals' watch, we're watching the country burn down as they continue to invest in the fossil fuel industry. We are in a climate emergency. And while the Liberals fail to act, the Conservatives pretty much completely deny the climate emergency entirely and are not willing to move forward into the future, into a clean economy that brings workers along. I want to ask the honourable member, you know, we're happy with that they're putting forward this legislation. How long is it going to take them to actually act? We are in a climate crisis. We need action, climate action now.
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
I can't agree more with the member opposite that we have to make sure that we steer our economy to where the world is looking. We're in a global shift, and that fighting climate change has to be at the top of our agenda. We've seen it with the wildfires and the hurricanes and the floods and the droughts. And it's terrible when we see things like yesterday with the Conservatives who brought a motion specifically, basically at its base, denying that fighting climate change is something that we must do. We know that we must do it, and we know that we must put workers at the center of where we are moving and their communities. And that is why I am looking forward to working with a member opposite and anyone in this House who feels like doing that, to move this quickly to committee so that we can do the important work to making this a law.
Questions and comments? The honourable parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To my honourable colleague, I'd like to ask a question following the same line as the last questioner in regards to what is the risk to the Canadian economy and Canadian workers if we actually don't put into place a clear plan, and if we're not strategic about supporting our workers as the world's economy is developing to address climate change, and what risk does Canada face by burying our head in the sand and not acknowledging that the jobs of the future are also the jobs that are going to solve the climate crisis?
Good question. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
I thank my colleague for that question, because it's so important that we recognize that fighting climate change, it's important because it helps us to avert the natural disasters that we're seeing in our country. But more than that, it's an economic policy. It is so important that we make sure that our economy is that net zero economy. People, when we talk to industry, and I've talked with different people from companies around the world who say that they look to Canada because we have one of the cleanest grids in the world. We can do better than that. We can have a net zero grid, which is what we're working towards. But more than that, when you talk about things like, for example, the EU, in only a few days, they're putting in place a border carbon adjustment. We want to be able to continue trade with that important bloc. If we get rid of things like a price on carbon pollution, if we stop taking action to fight climate change, that makes our trade relationships more difficult. If you believe in a strong economy, if you believe in workers, if you believe in trade, we need to fight climate change, and this bill is part of that work that we need to do.
Questions and comments? L'honorable député de Jean.
The honourable member for Joliette. Oh, no? Yes, Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her speech. Can the government confirm that respecting provincial jurisdiction is in this bill and that Quebec's workforce policies will be respected? Did the government think about this when drafting the bill? Can my honourable colleague confirm this? The honourable parliamentary secretary. Yes, absolutely. This bill applies to federal jurisdiction. We have consulted the provinces and territories. We consulted them when we drafted this bill, and we know that it's so important, and we will work closely with the provinces and territories because they also want to ensure that we are ready for net zero and to support workers in all provinces and territories. We will continue to work with them.
The honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
I'd like to thank the member for her speech, and I just wanted to pick up on this idea of working with creating a clean energy grid and cleaning all our forms of energy in the Canadian energy ecosystem. And one way we could do that to fight climate change, to bring down our emissions, and to keep Canadians safe is to have a real serious program to bring heat pumps to all Canadians. There's a small program in Atlantic Canada now. We really need this across the country. They are safe, they are efficient, and they work everywhere across Canada. And I'm just wondering why the government isn't really picking up on that in a big way.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Brief question. And we've run out of time.
We know that how we heat our homes, how we power our vehicles is so much an important part of what we're doing to reach net zero. I would like to make sure that the member opposite lets all of his constituents know about the Greener Homes loans and the Greener Homes grants. That's a chance where an auditor can go and make an assessment as to what is most needed. It might be insulation, it might be a heat pump. There might be different steps that are needed, but absolutely energy efficiency and making sure that we power our homes in a way that actually reduces emissions are both so very, very important to the transition to a net zero economy.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Lakeland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For all Canadians everywhere, for my bosses, the people of Lakeland, and on behalf of the official opposition, Conservatives oppose Bill C-50. It's dressed up as something else, but it's really the culmination and symbolic of the NDP Liberal costly coalition's divisive, top-down, central planning, economic restructuring and wealth redistributing, anti-private sector, anti-development, anti-energy agenda known previously and around the world as the so-called just transition. The reality is anything but just. It really represents a transition to poverty and diminishment of the standard of living and way of life most Canadians are able to enjoy. I'll make that case today and expand on it later as MPs do our job and our due diligence on this bill, which is about so much more than it seems at first. The NDP Liberals say it's about job training and helping workers in one sector develop some new skills for jobs in a, well, sector yet to get fully on its feet. But Canadians should know that it embodies almost a decade of incremental punitive policies, taxes, bans and penalties, red tape to end energy development in Canada and to kill those and all related jobs. It shows the core philosophical gap between Conservatives, and I think most Canadians, and all the other parties in this House. It puts top-down command and control planning and power in politicians and government to set and restructure the fundamentals of Canada's economy instead of job creators, entrepreneurs, inventors, dreamers, and individual Canadian citizens and consumers, which has built our country to the blessed place that it is. The consequences will be that it will ultimately make life more expensive and more unstable for all Canadians, like nearly everything else the costly coalition has done during the last 8 years. The just transition is a dangerous, government-mandated and direct threat to hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs, will displace hundreds of thousands of workers, and risk the livelihoods of Canadians across all provinces and territories in all sectors. Mark Conservatives' words. It will negatively impact the whole Canadian economy while disproportionately harming certain people and provinces like BC, the Prairies, and Atlantic Canada, and regions. There's nothing just about it, and the government knows it. Because after months and months of naming it and preparing it, at the very last minute, this government changed the wording from just transition to their so-called sustainable jobs plan. Because it sounds better. Because Canadians were worried about the just transition when they found out what it meant. So the NDP Liberals switched it out for their own PR and political purposes. Their early framework document from last summer even admits it. But it's the same old plan anchored on the NDP Liberals' agenda to end Canada's energy sector and to harm all the other spin-off jobs and sectors in all provinces that depend on it. The damage to Canada cannot be overstated. Whether the blind and divisive ideology of the other parties will allow them to admit this reality or not, let's get real about the stakes of this debate. Despite 8 years of layers of anti-energy policies, laws, bans, vetoes, caps, standards, penalties, taxes, and red tape that has driven billions of dollars and the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of Canadians out of our own country, the fact still remains today that oil and gas is literally the top private sector investor in Canada's economy, and energy is still Canada's largest export. It's the leading contributor to tax revenues at every level of government, more than $48 billion last year alone. And almost a decade into the coalition's anti-energy agenda, it still directly employs almost 200,000 people with average wages that are more than double the national average. The truth is that every single provincial and territorial budget depends on revenues from oil and gas, even in provinces where the elected people pretend it doesn't pay for the programs and services their citizens expect and count on. But it does, both directly and when the revenue from the incomes of energy workers are shared across the country in transfers. On top of that, oil and gas companies in Canada are the top private sector investors in clean technology, covering 75% of private sector investment in Canada in clean tech. They've been the private sector pioneers of alternative and renewable energy innovation for decades here because energy transformation is their expertise. I'm appalled that I even have to point out these facts in the hope we can have some semblance of a realistic debate here, since the anti-energy coalition has spent so much time dismissing, distorting, and denying it. At this point, I don't even know whether all these legislators here actually don't know the facts, which is obviously alarming in itself, or are just willfully ignorant and deliberately evasive in order to impose their own agenda. But the magnitude and gravity of what the end days of this approach will look like for Canadians means I must speak the truth, and Conservatives will keep doing so to do our duty in the best and public interest of all Canadians, which is our priority. The responsible development of Canada's natural resources has been the main driver to close the gap between the wealthy and poor, and is disproportionately responsible for the relatively high standard of living that most Canadians have enjoyed compared to other countries around the world. Energy development here constantly innovates and transforms. Engineers, inventors, and risk takers have built a globally renowned and the most environmentally and socially responsible means to displace higher polluting alternatives, accelerate technology to improve environmental stewardship, and help reduce emissions globally. It's often the only source of job and economic opportunities in rural and remote communities, especially Indigenous communities, who make up more than double the workforce percentage in oil and gas of Indigenous people in other sectors compared to the national average. As always, vulnerable people and people in rural and remote communities and people they say they care about, and also especially on the prairies and in Atlantic Canada, are the people whose C50 will disproportionately hurt the most. The truth is, though, this whole agenda will negatively impact all Canadians and all the major sectors. It will cascade through the economy, which is already happening in real time. This top-down central planning attempt to restructure the economy will hurt manufacturers in metals, rubber, plastics, and chemicals, technicians in the oil and gas sector, workers and truck drivers in the transportation sector bringing food to grocery stores, servers and cooks in the food services, farms and ranchers and agribusinesses, hotels, convenience stores, and all individual Canadians as the cost of living goes higher and higher as a direct result of the Liberals' anti-energy, anti-private sector policies. Canadians are already bearing all of these costs of just the beginning of these anti-energy laws, taxes, and red tape. It'll get worse. The carbon tax, of course, has hiked the cost of everything with no overall reductions in emissions or improved environmental performance to show for it. It's clearly not worth the cost because almost a decade in, it's not doing what the NDP Liberals claim, but it is fueling inflation and the cost of living crisis their government has caused. Basics, not luxuries, like groceries, gas, and home heating, are all more expensive with no end in sight. A stick of butter is almost $7 where I live. Gas has been hovering around $2 a litre in Alberta, Ontario, Atlantic Canada, more than that in parts of BC. Provinces have been working to try to lower fuel costs. Alberta suspended its gas tax only to have the NDP Liberals drive the cost right back up by bringing in their second carbon tax, from which no Canadian, be clear about this, no Canadian in any province is exempt. Other provinces, like in Atlantic Canada, plead with the federal NDP Liberals to pause the carbon taxes because their residents have to choose between eating and heating and can't make ends meet. The NDP Liberals wax eloquent about caring, but they make light of the struggles Canadians face, and they actually criticize Conservatives for being the only party actually fighting to lower costs and prices for everyone. They call names, impugn motives, distract and divide, and they keep right on rolling their agenda over everyone in the way. Layers and layers of NDP Liberal anti-energy policies like the No More Pipelines bill, the shipping bans, drilling bans, vetoes of approved energy infrastructure, and gatekeeping red tape designed to get to no, not to yes, have already destroyed over 300,000 jobs. Massive, long-term, promising oil and gas and pipeline investments, LNG terminals and export facilities, and mining operations have all been cancelled or delayed or can't even get started because of the uncertainty of this NDP Liberal agenda. What really concerns me is all the costly coalition efforts, or their ignorance, about the direct link between energy development and Canadians' everyday real lives. Right now, if Canada keeps going in the NDP Liberal government's direction, our country is on track to be one of the worst performers in standard of living increases in the world over the next 40 years. Terrible. There will be real costs, as they already are. Based on the NDP Liberals' catastrophically failed experiment with the coal transition, which left workers and whole communities behind, this next phase of the global just transition agenda will cost Canada almost $40 billion each year it's implemented. And that doesn't even include the loss in tax revenue and royalties from oil and gas. But don't take my word for it. The government's own internal brief says their just transition plan will kill 170,000 direct jobs, displace up to 450,000 direct and indirect jobs, and cause large-scale disruptions to manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, energy, and construction, impacting a staggering 2.7 million Canadian livelihoods. That's why Conservatives stand alone opposed to this agenda. It's absolutely not worth the cost. So I want to touch on disproportionate impacts. Despite all their empty rhetoric, which individual Canadians are going to be hurt directly and the most, well, the truth is this. Visible minority Canadians and Indigenous Canadians, who are more highly represented in the energy sector, are expected to face higher job disruptions and will have more trouble finding new opportunities as a result of this truly unjust plan. That's really gross. What's really gross is that the government knows it. Dale Swampy, president of the National Coalition of Chiefs, says, quote, "There is nothing fair or equitable about it." In committee, he put a fine point on how much worse the reality of this agenda will be for Indigenous communities. He said there are, quote, "high costs to this poor plan," and the, quote, "crisis we now face in First Nations." He said, "Many of our communities rely on diesel generation. People have to drive for hours to get to doctor's appointments or a grocery store. A lot of people aren't on the grid. And even those who are don't have the electricity capacity to add charging stations in garages they don't have. You won't find any electric cars on the reserve." Well, that's the case for lots of Canadians all across the country. The reality is oil and gas is still more readily available for remote communities. The projects last longer, have better wages, job security, benefits, and opportunities than other sectors provide. That's just the truth. So the NDP Liberals' plan to phase out oil and gas is bad for Canada, but it has international implications too. The ongoing attack on Ukraine should make it clear to the Liberals and the NDP that where the world gets its energy from really matters and underscores the importance of energy security. The NDP Liberal government should actually learn the lessons from other countries instead of plunging Canada down the same destructive path. Germany, for example, ignored energy security to try and phase out its own energy sector, relied on dictatorships like Russia to supply their citizens' needs, until Russia turned off the taps and Germany was forced to bring their coal power back online. And after canceling the KXL pipeline, President Joe Biden had to plead with OPEC dictators to increase oil exports. That failed, so he had to empty the U.S.'s Strategic Petroleum Reserve and end sanctions in Venezuela, even though he was also the VP when the U.S. ramped up shale gas and oil exports outside of North America, and the same year the U.S. imported more of that very same oil from Canada than ever before in their history. Apparently, hypocrisy abounds for the sake of domestic politics there, just like here, I guess. Of course, now the U.S. has upped the competitive ante on Canada even more, while the NDP Liberals leave us vulnerable and hold us back. And the U.S. hasn't actually slowed down their traditional energy development and exports either. They're ramping up. Canada can and should be an energy superpower. Right. And Conservatives believe we still can be with a change of government, but not for the title. Instead, to bring home energy self-sufficiency and security for our country and for the standard of living of our citizens first, and then to support free and democratic allies and developing nations around the world. It's wild that even now the NDP Liberals won't reverse their destructive plan, despite geopolitical realities and the necessity of stable, reliable, accessible, predictable, and affordable energy of all kinds for Canada's communities, economy, and sovereignty that is more obvious and necessary than ever. Canada should accelerate energy projects and infrastructure for energy alignment with North America and to allies around the world. Canada should maintain and expand its place at the top of energy-producing nations, supply growing global energy demand while alternative energy and other fuels of the future are in development, but not yet abundant or reliable enough for all domestic or global needs. Canada can aim to meet net zero targets while continuing to reap the benefits of the sector that's leading the entire world in innovation and clean technology. That's what an actual evidence-based policy would do. In fact, that's the only feasible way to meet Canadian energy needs, grow Canada's economy, and achieve environmental goals until other alternatives, which are currently in development, become real, viable options for all Canadians. But the NDP Liberals are rushing ahead anyway, ignoring science, economics, and expert testimony for their own ideology. When evidence and experts show their plans massive flaws, they obfuscate through rebranding campaigns and buzzwords while ignoring or attacking any critics. For example, when the government held 2 consultation phases on it, Quebec, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and none of it were left out, the Natural Resources Committee, which I'm on, was in the middle of a study about the just transition, hearing testimony when the NDP Liberals brought in this bill before the work was even finished. The final report was selective to suit their agenda. As they do, it attacks Canada's energy sector, fails to recognize Canada's world-class environmental standards, and encourages an accelerated transition away from the livelihoods and businesses on which millions of Canadians depend. Instead of examining and making recommendations on practical and feasible ways and timelines for increased technological development and grid decarbonization without risking Canada's economy and standard of living. The report was twisted to prop up the bill after the fact and totally excluded the large group of witnesses who highlighted the gaps, contradictions, and realities of this agenda. And it's worth noting that during the entire 64-witness, 23-brief, year-plus long study, only one non-government witness ever called it sustainable jobs. So it's almost insultingly obvious as the cynical last-minute attempt that it is to obscure their real aims and the real consequences. Listen, the Liberals already failed their just transition attempt for 3,400 coal workers in 14 communities. And they are, whoever they are, says past behavior is a good predictor of future behavior. Last year, the Environment Commissioner said that plan failed by every measure, left those workers and all those communities behind. Now they claim they can do this for 2.7 million workers across every sector of the economy. Call Canadians skeptical, and rightly so. Bill C-50 is more of the same. It will be that kind of failure, and that's why Conservatives also oppose it. But the key question for Canadians is, what's the experience of other countries who are 30 to 40 years down the road of the policy agenda imposed by the NDP Liberals on Canada? Well, the answer is alarming, and it should cause a serious pause to elected representatives in Canada here at home. In European countries, after implementing various just transition policies in the late 2010s, electricity bills doubled from 2021 to 2022. But let's talk about some specifics. German citizens faced a 200% increase. Scandinavians saw imagine this, 470% increase. Like, what does that even mean? 470% increase in power bills. That was, of course, before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In the UK, literally 3 days ago, governments are stopping big elements of their anti-energy policies, including their ban on internal combustion engines and the transition away from natural gas heating. They're removing their tax on jet fuel, oppose calls to ban new oil and gas production in the North Sea, and the UK is, of course, extending coal plants' life cycles through next year. This will continue because this approach doesn't work. In Australia, the government scrapped the carbon tax after it made everything more expensive, harmed resource development, a pillar of their middle economy, just like Canada, although they've got many advantages over us, and caused a spiral of damage across the board, and instead now use incentives to spur clean investment and clean energy development like we Conservatives propose. France axed their carbon tax more than 5 years ago in the midst of soaring prices and escalating cost of living crisis and riots in the streets. In Sweden, the government has slashed taxes on gasoline, just like what Conservatives have been calling for here at home, and actually announced a surprising pause of all of their policy efforts towards net zero this past summer. instead of tripling taxes and plunging ahead down this perilous path. Germans, of course, have gone on to bring back online 15 coal-fired plants with extended life cycles to combat rising power costs, which also contracted the country's GDP. And now coal accounts for a third of German energy generation for 5 million homes. That's just a few of the many countries that are farther ahead of Canada down this road and are backing up because of the consequences, the severity of the consequences for their citizens, escalating cost of living crisis, skyrocketing power prices, falling GDP and standards of living, crashing power grids and unstable fuel sources, risk to sovereignty and vulnerability to hostile powers. Now, all that's becoming very familiar to Canadians after 8 years of this Prime Minister, but it's not a coincidence. Instead, it's a consequence, and it is all connected. Conservatives plead for the NDP Liberals to get this reality before it's too late, and we will keep fighting to protect, to maintain Canadians' livelihoods, opportunities, and the standard of living while maintaining the best and ever-improving environmental performance in the world that we know Canadians expect. The Liberal NDP's just transition must be considered in the context of all these cost-hiking measures on Canadians that they've imposed. They will increase the cost of living, kill Canadian jobs and communities, risk economic activity, jobs, and tax revenue to all levels of government from Canada's largest sector, and will jeopardize the reliable, affordable, and abundant energy that Canadians need every day. Instead of examining practical ways and timelines for grid decarbonization without risking the economy and the livelihoods of millions of Canadians, the just transition attacks Canadian oil and gas workers and all the other jobs and businesses that depends on it. Environmental stewardship must be addressed with realistic, concrete, and effective measures. Conservatives want realistic transformation, not transition, technology, not taxes, and the evolution of energy sources to be led and paid for by the private sector, not forced by a government's command and control agenda. Right. Conservatives believe Canada must develop both our traditional alternative energy sources and support the development of industries like hydrogen, biofuels, wind, solar, nuclear, tidal, and other innovations. We will make both traditional and alternative energy affordable and accessible, accelerate approvals on infrastructure and export projects, and green projects. We're the only party.
I'm sorry, the honourable member's time is up. The honourable questions and comments. The honourable parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and to the Minister of Natural Resources.
I think you mean me. Public safety, that's okay. Madam Speaker, that's okay. Thank you. That's okay, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to ask my honourable colleague a question. In her speech, she spoke about how the Conservatives view tackling climate change through technology, yet they also oppose the Atlantic Accord, which would actually allow for technology development in Atlantic Canada. She also spoke about the cost of energy in Atlantic Canada. However, once again, by blocking the Atlantic Accord, Conservatives actually block from economic development in Atlantic Canada, the ability to reduce energy prices in Atlantic Canada, and good jobs for Atlantic Canadians. So, Madam Speaker, my question is, do the Conservatives even believe climate change is real? And how do they plan to address it if they continue to block technological advancements? And why won't they allow Atlantic Canadians to have good, clean jobs of the future?
Yes, and I do want to apologize as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs. With the changes recently, we're just trying to adjust a bit. The Honourable, and the time was stopped, so it's not impacting on your time, okay? Yeah, no, that's all good. I did stop the time to make sure we weren't taking away from questions and comments. So the honourable member for Lakeland.
Thanks, Madam Speaker, and I really appreciate that question because, again, it gives me the ability to address the reality of C-49 rather than their false claims. Mm-hmm. So here's the truth about C-49. It imports a number of clauses from C-69, and it includes a number of clauses from another bill, C-55. The consequences of both of those bills embedded in C-49 are exactly exactly what has unfolded and what Conservatives warned about in previous debates. C-49 will hold up, it will delay, it will roadblock, and it will gatekeep alternative and renewable offshore development, just like it is also a simultaneous attack on petroleum offshore development. So here again, I'm not sure if Liberals don't read the bills, don't know what they're talking about, or just reading what someone says, but these issues are grave. They are serious for the underpinning of our economy and our standard of living. So we oppose Bill C-49 because it's an attack on energy to end the petroleum offshore opportunities. But it also will hold up, roadblock, delay, and gatekeep renewable and alternative offshore energy development. So Conservatives are going to accelerate approvals, make sure projects can actually get built, cut timelines, and make both traditional and alternative energy sources available and affordable for all.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to get back to C-50, not C-49. What I've heard was quite concerning to me, and it proves that the Conservatives are the spokespeople of the private sector, the private oil sector, billionaires. A recent poll shows that 2/3 of Albertans polled on a moratorium to solar and wind disagree with their premier. Do Conservatives know that there are other sources of energy other than oil, gas, and coal?
For Lakeland.
I appreciate my colleague's question again because it lets me to put some reality and facts on the table. And again, I'm not sure if the Bloc knows the facts either, but here it is. Now, I hate to be a homer all the time, but Alberta actually for decades has led this country in renewable and alternative energy development. We have the largest and oldest solar and wind farms, commercial wind farms in this country, to the point that they're already being decommissioned. Now, maybe people want to point out the fact that it's still only 2% of our grid, which is, something that should be a lesson. But this is the thing. We're also the leader in Alberta on the development of alternative and renewable energy technologies and the fuels of the future right now. What the provincial government is doing is setting certain conditions, giving certainty, giving clarity to private sector proponents and all Albertans to have confidence in the regulatory regime. We have always led the country on renewable and alternative energy because that's their energy companies' expertise. We don't have a history of putting that on governments, ratepayers, and taxpayers. We do it through free enterprise policies. That's the opportunity that awaits all of Canada. So what concerns me is that these guys don't seem to know that it's oil and gas companies doing all that work.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Lakeland for her speech. She said she wanted to base it on facts, and there's apparently some alternate world out there about facts. The fact is, she mentioned that the fossil fuel sector has about just less than 200,000 employees in Canada. The clean energy sector already has 430 employees in that sector, and it's expected to grow by more than 200,000 over the next 10 years. That's where the workers, where her constituents, workers across Canada, are looking. And I would just close by saying she should read John Valiant's book, Fireweather, about her province, about the world, about climate change, and about the industry that she is such a fierce protector for.
The Honourable for Lakeland.
What I'm a fierce protector for is the livelihoods, the cost of living, the standard of living of the people that I represent and every single vulnerable community and citizen across this country. Now, I appreciated working with that honourable member on the Natural Resources Committee in my first term. He should probably get into the coalition cabinet and ask them about how they haven't actually done the interties, and they've set these unrealistic targets that are impossible, for which they will answer no single concrete question about who's going to pay for it and how we're going to get there. But just in case people don't want to take my word for it, and I understand because politicians, so that Canadians understand, this is not just about a war on oil and gas, which it absolutely is. How do we know that it's about economic restructuring? Well, we know that because the Prime Minister and the Natural Resources Minister himself have said it. Last week in the House of Commons, the Minister for Natural Resources, and I would note it's only parliamentary secretaries here, so it seems like a real priority. Last week, the minister talked on this issue, and he said economic restructuring. And in COVID, the Prime Minister said this was an opportunity to reset and restructure the economy. That's what this is about.
Yeah. So the honourable member will have 3.5 minutes. The honourable member will have 3.5 minutes after question period to answer questions and comments. And I do want to remind her that she's not to say indirectly or indirectly who may be in the House and who's not in the House. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Cape Breton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's with a heavy heart that I rise in the House today to pay tribute to Cape Breton's own Bruce Guthrow. Whether at home in Cape Breton or across the Atlantic with the Scottish band Runrig, Bruce was a shining star whose musical talent brought so much joy and comfort to so many. While some folks at home certainly knew of Bruce's health challenges, his recent passing nevertheless sent shockwaves to the riding of Cape Breton, Canso and beyond. Bruce was an incredible singer, songwriter, musician, and ambassador for all of Cape Breton and what we had to offer. And this was really reflected, Madam Speaker, in the beautiful send-off that so many watched via Facebook and other forms of media. In particular, I want to send a sincere condolence to Bruce's wife, Kim, and his children and their children, Jody and Dylan, at this difficult time. I will say this, Madam Speaker, Cape Breton Council will sorely miss Bruce Guthrow. Thank you.
Good job.
I do want to remind members that there is business going on, and for those who are coming in, to please keep the sound down. It's important that we hear what members have to say. The honourable member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Madam Speaker, fall is upon us, and in my rural Manitoba riding, farmers are wrapping up harvest with most crops safely in the bin. The fall calf run has started with roundup underway on our ranches, and commercial fishers are busy landing their catch on Lake Winnipeg. This should be a time of Thanksgiving, but sadly, Canadian farm, ranch, and commercial fishing families are being overtaxed and overregulated by this NDP Liberal government. This costly coalition is quadrupling the carbon tax, making it more expensive every time hardworking families fuel up their tractors, combines, trucks, and boats. These misinformed Liberals have unilaterally implemented draconian trucking and fertilizer regulations that will lower farm productivity and increase food insecurity. When you tax the people who grow the food and tax the people who truck the food, it costs us more to buy the food. After 8 long years, Canadians can't afford this Liberal mismanagement anymore. But better times are ahead. Soon there'll be great Thanksgiving and celebration across the land when we get rid of these out-of-touch Liberals and replace them with a common-sense Conservative government who put Canadians first.
Yes, sir. L'honorable député de Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake.
Madam Speaker, I stand today in the House to strongly encourage my Conservative colleagues to support Bill C-49, an important bill for Nova Scotia's future. The proposed amendments in the Atlantic Accord will create a framework for the offshore renewable energy sector under the Act for the province of Nova Scotia, with an estimated $1 trillion to be invested in the sector globally by 2040. It's crucial that Canada position itself to attract investment and become world leaders in clean energy. Despite having the longest coastline and best wind speed in the world, Canada does not have today one single commissioned offshore wind project to show today. Passing Bill C-49 will go a long ways towards meeting our emission targets, decarbonizing the power grid, and bring great jobs for Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Griesbach.
To kill the Indian in the child. That was the goal of Canada's horrific residential schools. A brutal policy made in this place that stole thousands of children like my cookum Christina and subjected them to cruel torture and neglect that resulted in the serious trauma and death. Intergenerational trauma haunts families of residential school survivors today, and it is up to all of us to stand with them, to acknowledge our inheritance, and to ensure we end this ongoing genocide. Survivors have come forward and done the impossible. They have told their stories. reopened wounds, and shared with us solutions manifested in the 94 TRC calls to action. To date, we've only accomplished 13 of those calls to action. At this rate, it will take us till 2065 to accomplish all of them. Let us not repeat the mistakes of the past. Let us act diligently. Let us fulfill our country's promise of truth, of reparations, and then, and only then, Madam Speaker, will we have reconciliation.
The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to recognize the opening this fall of a magnificent new building that will serve Kingston's Francophone community. On September 13th, our community held a grand opening ceremony for the building that will house the students of Kingston's two Francophone high schools, École secondaire publique Mille-Îles and École secondaire catholique Sainte-Marie-Rivière. The two schools have around 500 students, and their shared space highlights French language education in Kingston. The new facility unites our region's Francophone and Francophile community, providing an inclusive space to celebrate French learning, arts, and culture. Congratulations, and happy first year in your new premises.
The honourable member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
This past summer, there was some real talent on the baseball diamonds in Bruce Grey, Owen Sound. Two softball teams from my hometown of Tara, Ontario, were crowned Canadian champions. The under-17 Tara Twins took the fast-pitch Canadian Championship tournament in Fredericton, New Brunswick by storm, winning the gold medal against the Plattsville Lightning. The under-15 Tara Longhorns headed to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan for their Canadian Championships, where they defeated the Newfoundland Selects to bring the gold medal back home to Tara, too. Tara was also honored to host the Under-13 Ontario Amateur Softball Association Provincial Championships. It was great to see so many keen baseball players from across Ontario make it out to our booming town. With all the visitors, I'm sure we even cracked 1,000 people that weekend, Madam Speaker. Finally, I want to take the time to thank all the coaches, parents, and volunteers involved in putting together a successful season for the Twins, Longhorns, and all the other local sports teams. Their efforts and tireless dedication to youth sports are critical in ensuring our youth live healthy and active lifestyles. Once again, congratulations and play ball.
Yes. The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
It's an honour to rise for the first time in this House as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth. And Speaker, our government does great work empowering our next generation of leaders through programs like Canada Summer Jobs, Youth Employment and Skills, and Canada Service Corps. Like many MPs, I spent this summer touring organizations and small businesses, meeting participants, and hearing about how many young people fruitfully employed on Hamilton Mountain today started their careers as summer students through federal programs in years past. In my constituency office, our summer leadership program participant, Sarfina, organized more than 30 engaged students to form a Hamilton Mountain Constituency Youth Council, which is working on a project to benefit the whole community. It's not just our youth who need these programs for a good start in life. The benefit is mutual. When young people apply their energy, ideas, and diverse skills to our businesses and organizations, our collective future is brighter.
The honourable member for Whitby.
Madam Speaker, I would like to start by taking this opportunity to recognize and appreciate our new police chief in Durham Region, Peter Morera. Earlier this month, I had the opportunity to attend the Durham Region Police Service's Youth in Policing Program graduation ceremony, where they recognized the remarkable achievements of 85 young graduates. You should have seen it, Madam Speaker. This diverse group of youth and their families from across Durham Region were beaming with pride and overflowing with self-expression after a challenging 8-week program where the youth overcame much, learned essential life skills, and demonstrated leadership through organizing projects that contributed positively to our community. These projects included organizing a youth soccer tournament, hosting a youth forum, and raising over $10,000 for the Hearth Place Cancer Support Center. I invite all members of this House to join me in sending the heartiest congratulations to the graduates on their achievements, and know that we anticipate truly great things from you in the future.
The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawathra Lake Brock.
Speaker, September 30th marks the day put aside to remember the tragedy of the residential school system, the unjust colonial practices in Canada's past, and the trauma and lost opportunities of generations of Indigenous peoples. It's crucial to understand that reconciliation is a path, a process that requires our sustained commitments and dedication. It begins with acknowledging the truth and the pain inflicted upon Indigenous peoples. And it continues with meaningful actions that address the ongoing disparities and inequities Indigenous peoples have faced for far too long. To truly honor the spirit of reconciliation, we must address this by creating equitable opportunities for Indigenous peoples in areas such as employment, education, entrepreneurship, and resource sharing. It means dismantling the barriers that have hindered economic progress for Indigenous communities and empowering them to shape their economic futures. Let us commit to Indigenous self-determination and prosperity and a more and just equitable future. Remember the past, honor the survivors, and commit ourselves to a future where reconciliation is not just a dream, but a reality for all.
Honourable member for the honourable member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Speaker, public safety is an issue that is important to each and every member of this House, and one of which I've heard about from my constituents. This is why I'm proud that our government is implementing reform to the bail system that will help keep repeat offenders off the street. Bill C-48, which passed this House last week and is moving swiftly through the Senate, creates a reverse onus for repeat offenders and those accused of crimes with a firearm and a knife. It examines the onus on those accused of intimate partner violence, and it requires the courts to consider whether an accused person has a history of convictions involving violence when making a bail order. This bill was crafted responsibly with input from all relevant stakeholders and has the support of provincial and territorial leaders. It sends a strong message that judges ought to seriously consider the public safety risks posed by repeat offenders at the bail stage. This bill is just one of a suite of measures that our government has introduced to protect the public from violent offenders and to ensure that people in the Sioux and all across this country are safe on the streets. Thank you very much, Speaker.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, Quebecers have seen how bitter the Bloc Québécois leader has been over the past few days. He's called us scum, cockroaches, low-flying lobbyists. Those are the terms he's using, and it shows that the Bloc leader is at war, not against Conservatives, but against Quebecers who don't want to pay more for gas. Yesterday, we proposed a motion to scrap the increases to the carbon tax, to leave more money in the pockets of young Quebecers who are living from paycheck to paycheck. I'd like to finish off with a quote from the Conservative leader. He said, "I have a message for the Liberal Prime Minister and leader of the Bloc. The people of the regions and farmers need their trucks and energy for their daily lives. You're not allowed to take any more money out of their pockets. I'll scrap the Liberal Bloc tax and bring prices back down and put an end to the war against cars. It's common sense."
Key Liberal policies that censor Canadians and attack their basic freedoms. Whether it's the freedom to dream of a vibrant future, the freedom to watch the YouTube channel they wish to, or the freedom to access news online. The current federal government has exercised an inordinate amount of autocratic power for the last 8 years. But I'm encouraged by the growing number of Canadians who are dreaming of a better and more vibrant future, a future that only freedom can deliver. Imagine what Canada would look like if the Canadian people were put before government, and if attacks on personal liberties were relinquished, if hardworking people were freed up to earn powerful paychecks that would buy affordable gas, groceries, and homes. This is the type of Canada that we can create, and we can do so by generating opportunity for each and every person to reach their greatest potential.
Yes.
It's time to bring home freedom.
The honourable member for Hull-Elmer. Madam Speaker, today is National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Tomorrow we will gather on Algonquin and Anishinaabe unceded territory to mark the profound significance of this day as we come together to remember, reflect, and act together. But let's be clear. This isn't a conversation for one day. It's a call to become lifelong learners, constantly striving to understand the injuries of the past and their ongoing implications. This day invites us to dive deeper into the complex relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. It's an opportunity to learn, empathize, and grow together, today, tomorrow, and every day. Let's take a moment to think about the resilience of Indigenous communities. Let's commit to standing with them as we work together for a better future. Change begins with each one of us. Together, we can honor the strength and spirit of Indigenous communities, working for a Canada where reconciliation isn't just a word, it's a reality. Thank you, miigwech. I'd like to remind members in the House that if you would like to have conversations during statements, you should leave the chamber because there's a lot of noise and it's really a lack of respect for those who are making their statements.
Ça continue?
It's still happening? Excuse me? If you don't mind, please take your conversations outside. The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Madam Speaker, this Saturday, September 30th, is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And in my community, on the homelands of the Lekwungen people, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, the second annual South Island Powwow will be taking place at Royal Athletic Park. The Songhees Nation is partnering with the City of Victoria to host this event to honor survivors and their families and to celebrate traditional Indigenous culture through song and dance. First Nations far and wide will be joining the Songhees Nation to celebrate in their time-honored powwow. Last year's powwow brought over 10,000 people to witness and participate and to stand together on Orange Shirt Day. Eddie Charlie and Kristen Spray, the organizers of Victoria Orange Shirt Day, will be there, and I want to thank Eddie for his tireless advocacy to make September 30th a national holiday. I'll be there at the South Island Powwow this weekend, but wherever you are, I hope you take the opportunity to remember the children who never came home, to recognize survivors and the intergenerational impacts of residential schools, and to honor the strength of Indigenous communities and the power of Indigenous culture.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, tomorrow, September 30th, is Truth and Reconciliation Day, a First Nations initiative to commemorate the painful history of residential schools and to remember all those who suffered the trauma that followed them all their lives, as well as all those children who never came home and their families. On this occasion, we're all invited to show our solidarity by wearing orange, which for Indigenous peoples symbolizes truth and healing. There's still work to be done to find out the truth about residential schools, but this is the first step. We need to know in order to understand the grave consequences of this programmed cultural dispossession which span generations. But time alone won't heal the wounds. We need concrete gestures of reconciliation towards First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. But only they can identify what those gestures should be. It's up to us to show the respect that has too often been lacking throughout our history. It's essential if we're to write the next chapter of history together.
L'honorable député de Caribou.
The Honourable Member for Caribou Prince George.
Chaos are running rampant on the streets of our country due to this Prime Minister's soft on crime approach. Nowhere is this more apparent than in my home province of British Columbia. The BC NDP, with the support of this NDP Liberal government, are now actively involved in the illegal drug trade. Overnight, we learned that the BC NDP are funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars to a group that buys drugs on the black market and then distributes them on the streets of my province. After 8 long years of this Prime Minister, this shocking story should come as no surprise. Rather than creating real solutions to the opioid and overdose crisis, the Prime Minister prefers to take the easy way out, to transfer Canadians' hard-earned money to illegal drug dealers instead. With overdoses now leading the cause of death among people aged 10 to 59 in our country, it's clear to Canadians that this Prime Minister is out of touch and just not worth the cost.
The Honourable Member for Sydney Victoria.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to reflect on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I cannot overstate the harms that the Indian residential school caused. In comparison, during World War II, 1 in 26 soldiers who went over to fight did not come home. In the Indian residential schools, 1 in 25 children did not come home. Those who came home struggled, many who lost language, culture, and family values. Madam Speaker, tomorrow I ask Canadians, if you meet a survivor, show kindness and compassion, because you don't know what they've been through. I think about so many members of my community and my family who went to the Shubenacadie Indian residential schools, and we have so much to work to do in this country, and we have so much to learn about our shared history. Tomorrow and every day after, let us walk the journey of reconciliation together. Thank you.
I'm going to allow the honourable member for Hall-Elmer to redo his statement, because there was, between the official opposition and the government, there was conversations going right across from where he was speaking a while ago. So I will afford the honourable member for Hall-Elmer to redo his statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. September 30th is National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Tomorrow, we will gather on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe to mark the profound significance of this day as we come together to remember, reflect, and act together. But let's be clear, Madam Speaker, this isn't a one-day conversation. It's a call to become lifelong learners, constantly striving to understand the wounds of the past and their ongoing implications. This day invites us to dive deeper into the complex relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. It's an opportunity to learn, empathize, and grow together. Today, tomorrow, and every day, let's take a moment to reflect on the resilience of Indigenous communities. Let's commit to standing with them as we work together for a better future. Change begins with each one of us. Together, we can honor the strength and spirit of Indigenous communities. Working for a Canada where reconciliation is not just a word, it's a reality. Thank you, miigwech.
And again, I just want to remind members that during statements, some of these statements are very emotional and touching, and so it's really important that when members come into the House that they keep their voices very low, and if they want to have conversations, to please take them outside, because everybody has the right to be to ensure that their statement isn't destroyed. So oral questions, questions orales. The honourable member for Thornhill.
Prime Minister says that it's not his job to control the inflationary spending or the out-of-control cost of living or the sky-high interest rates that he has caused. He says it's not his job to bring down the price of gas, groceries, or home heating. Instead, he's raising the carbon tax. And he says it's not his job to take personal responsibility for our diplomatic relations or to vet the people who come in contact with a wartime leader. He says housing is not his job either. Well, the housing crisis is getting worse. If it's not his job to do anything, any of these things, what is his job?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I find it rather rich, Madam Speaker, with all due respect to the member, when that party's leader of the opposition, a responsibility to put forward constructive policy, when he was in opposition, in government, as minister responsible for housing, put forward a plan, $300 million, less than 100 homes built. His plan on housing today is full of holes. He taxed builders, for example. Nothing will get built under his watch, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The honourable for Thornhill.
Madam Speaker, they spent almost $90 billion to double the price of a home, to double the price of rent, to double the price of a mortgage. In Toronto, it now takes 80% of what Canadians take home to keep a roof over their head. More liberal spending equals higher inflation, which leads to higher interest rates, which leads to higher mortgages. So how many Canadians have to be in jeopardy of losing their homes before the Liberals stop spending, stop raising taxes, and actually start building homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, Canadians are having a difficult time. That's why during the pandemic we put forward emergency programs that sustain the economy, individuals and families, when that party didn't want to do any of those things. Today we see a government that's put forward a plan to get more homes built. How? In partnership with provinces, with municipalities. That's how we're going to get things done, not by measures on the other side that instill nothing but fear in the wider Canadian economy and the wider Canadian society. That's not responsible leadership, Madam Speaker.
Honourable member for Thornhill.
Home building is actually down just because they have a fancy program or a new acronym every month. It doesn't mean that any of this is working.
Right.
The government had a plan in 2015 to build housing on surplus land. Do you know how many homes they've built since 2015? 13. That's less than 2 a year. Liberal MPs have flipped more houses than that since 2015. It's been 8 years. We need shovels in the ground and not pies in the sky. So will they finally support a common sense Conservative plan to actually build homes Canadians can afford?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Common sense. It's a shame she wasn't at yesterday's Finance Committee, Madam Speaker, where witnesses from the Ministry of Finance confirmed that if their idea for housing was to be put in place, less homes would be built compared to our particular plan. It's a plan that takes taxes off. The GST comes off, for example. That incents greater building, Madam Speaker. Combine that with the approach they've taken to municipalities, to provinces, when it comes to ending things like exclusionary zoning. We want to work with those municipalities. We're doing that through the Housing Accelerator Fund. That will continue. The result will be 200,000 to 300,000 homes built as a result.
The Député de Louis Saint Laurent.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Madam Speaker, 5 long days, for 5 days, the Prime Minister brought the Nazi scandal to headlines all over the world. He hid for 5 days, and he allowed Canada's reputation to be dragged through the mud. When a country is humiliated like this, it is up to the leader of the government to protect its reputation. But what did this Liberal Prime Minister do? He hid. Why?
L'Honorable Ministre de Sécurité Publique.
The Minister of Public Safety? Oh, no, that's not quite right. But thank you, Madam Speaker. The former Speaker of the House, as my colleague knows very well, has clearly stated that he was the only person responsible for having invited this person to the House and for recognizing him. It was his initiative, and no other parliamentarian or the government was involved or informed. The former Speaker invited his own guests for the speech on Friday, and they were chosen by him and his own office. As soon as we learned about this horrible event that occurred in the House, the Prime Minister recognized that it was very painful for all Canadians and all those who have suffered due to the Holocaust. The Honourable Member. Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal government, Quebecers are struggling. We learned in the Journal de Montréal that according to a survey, 51% of young Quebecers are living from paycheck to paycheck. And that's not good for anyone, because when youth is traumatized, well, the entire future is at stake for Canada and Quebec. During this difficult time for our youth, what is the genius idea of this Liberal government supported by the Bloc Québécois inventing a second carbon tax? Voting for the Bloc has a price. Why does the Liberal Bloc think that this is a good idea to grab even more money out of the pockets of young Quebecers and to levy a second carbon tax? The Honourable Minister of Transport. My colleague wants to talk about costs. How much does it cost when our forests burn, when our lakes and rivers flood? How much does destroyed infrastructure cost? What about the price on our children's health when they breathe dirty air? What does that cost? Clearly, we don't have the means to put up with a Conservative government. Madam Speaker, Canada's greenhouse gas emissions did not go down last year. Instead, they grew by 2.1%. That's what we've heard from the Climate Institute of Canada. And that's almost entirely due to one sector, where the 5 biggest companies brought in $200 billion in profit last year. A sector that has received billions of dollars in subsidies to pollute less, but it's actually increasing Canada's emissions. And what sector is that? Well, it's oil and gas, of course. When will the government stop filling their pockets with public money? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her question, and I have great news for her. Canada is the first country in the G20 to eliminate subsidies to the oil and gas sector. We're the first country to have done that 2 years before the deadline in 2025. We did that this year, and we are going to eliminate public funding to fossil fuels, and we are the only G20 country to have made that commitment. Canada is fighting climate change, and it's working. We have the best record of any country in the G7 from 2019 and 2021 out of all countries in the G7 for reducing emissions. The Honourable Member, Madam Speaker, 2.1% increase in greenhouse gas emissions due to the oil and gas sector, but the government isn't turning the screws on the sector. Instead, it's giving them more money. Last week, it announced that it wanted to double oil production off Newfoundland. These companies are increasing all of Canada's emissions, but the federal government is actually making it easier for them to pollute even more instead of doing the opposite. When will this government stop being part of the problem? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I would invite my honourable colleague to read our plan to fight climate change, which environmentalists, scientists, municipalities, the City of Montreal, and many others have all said is a great plan, which shows that, like all other sectors in Canada, the oil and gas sector will have to do its fair share. And that is why we already have a regulation that will reduce methane emissions by at least 40% by 2025. And that is a very serious type of emission. And we also have the Clean Fuel Standard to force gas and diesel producers to reduce the impact.
Madam Speaker, it pains me to say that Saskatchewan has one of the highest rates of child poverty in the country. But instead of ensuring they don't go hungry, the Conservative government of Saskatchewan wants to use the notwithstanding clause to save a policy a judge would said it was causing irreparable harm. Is that what Conservatives stand for, dividing people and trampling on human rights? That doesn't sound like common sense to me. Now, will the government do everything they can to stop the harm against Canadian children?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for this very important question. We're fully aware of the Government of Saskatchewan's proposed use of the notwithstanding clause. We are dead set against the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause in any circumstances. The notwithstanding clause is intended to protect minority rights, not suppress them. In light of the decision by the court of Saskatchewan yesterday, we would have thought that the Government of Saskatchewan would have taken a moment to pause, reflect, and wait until the process played itself out. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
Homes are supposed to be where dreams are cultivated. For Inuit and Indigenous peoples, homes are overcrowded, molded, and spaces where dreams vanish. Children have no space to do homework. Women have no space to flee abusive partners. Inuit and Indigenous peoples have little to no space to take care of their mental well-being. This is the result of decades of Liberal and Conservative underfunding. When will the Liberals finally close this funding housing gap?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for her passion and for her question. And our government is fully aware that in order to advance reconciliation, we need to close the gap between Indigenous people and the rest of Canada, as well as address the harms that is caused through colonization and underfunding. Our government is committed to doing that. We have a tremendous ability and record of first in our country for Indigenous people. We'll continue to make those progress, and I thank the member, and I look forward to working with her on the INAN committee together to do so.
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Well, just a week ago, under this Prime Minister's watch, a Nazi was welcomed in this place and actually honoured within this chamber. Now, when the Prime Minister should have been a statesman and taken full responsibility, instead he chose to flee and hide. Not just for 1 day, not just for 2 days, but actually for 5 days. For 5 days he was mute. For 5 days he watched as our reputation was tarnished. For 5 days he was in hiding. For 5 days he utterly embarrassed our country. The Prime Minister has yet to take responsibility. Will he stand up, do the brave thing, and do that today?
L'Honorable Ministre des Services Publics et de l'Approvisionnement.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
the former Speaker has made it very clear that he alone was responsible for inviting this individual to the House and recognizing him. It was his initiative, and no other parliamentarians nor the government were involved. The former Speaker invited his own guests for Friday's address, which were determined by him in his own office. No advance notice was provided to the Prime Minister's office nor to the Ukrainian delegation about the invitation or the recognition. There are many Canadians who are hurt by this, and this mistake has been especially difficult for Jewish, Ukrainian, and
The honourable member for Lethbridge.
Member proves my point. It's the Prime Minister of Canada. He is meant to function as a statesman, to take personal responsibility when a mistake happens. Yeah. And yet, instead, he chose to flee. He chose to hide.
Cowardly.
Why? Why? Why not take personal responsibility? Why not remedy this on the world stage? Why not acknowledge the grave atrocities that have taken place in our history and the mistake that was made here in this House and the impact that that would have on Canadians? So I'll give him an opportunity today. Would he honorably stand up, take that personal responsibility, and apologize to Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, the former Speaker has made it very clear that he alone was responsible for inviting this individual to the House and recognizing him. It was his initiative, and no one in this House knew of that. The Prime Minister, the same day we learned of this horrendous incident that occurred in the House, the Prime Minister recognized on the same day that this was painful for Canadians and communities who were affected by the Holocaust.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you. Yesterday in the Finance Committee, this government's own department told the Finance Committee that in fact in 2018 they warned the Liberal government of an impending housing crisis, yet they did nothing. Incredibly, CMHC officials went on to say that the policies currently employed by the federal government are not sufficient to solve the housing problem. If in fact this government's own department doesn't believe in this Liberal government, why should Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Ministry of Infrastructure's Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. I knew there was one in there.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would remind my honourable colleague to look at the actual record and to look at the actions of that opposition leader who this summer, while presenting himself as some sort of champion of the working class, stood in front of a Canadian's home, took a video, and called that home a shack. If he is serious about dealing with affordability and the housing crisis and the supply crisis that underpins it, I want to hear from him and his party serious plans along the lines of what we've presented on this side. We're going to continue to fight for Canadians.
I want to remind members, if they want to have conversations while answers and questions are being asked, they should take their conversations outside. The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, Canada's problems are real. We have incredible food bank usage. We have housing costs doubling. Millions of Canadians cannot afford their own homes, yet this side decides to play games. Back when the leader of the opposition was housing minister, housing was affordable in the country. So when will this government finally get serious, remove the gatekeepers, balance the budget so Canadians can keep their homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, he's quite correct. That side does play games. You know what else they do? They also vote against tax cuts for the middle class. They also vote against child care for kids. They vote against dental care for kids. Discussions of pharmacare are happening at this time. That side wants to entertain none of it. At a time when Canadians are facing real challenges of affordability, government can be there to help. This government has put serious measures on the table. It's having an effect. We're going to continue to do that. They should wake up and come to the party.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Madam Speaker, 97%. That's the share of income a household would need to cover home ownership costs now in Vancouver. This from a new RBC report which says housing affordability in most major Canadian cities is near all-time worst levels. The Prime Minister also holds the all-time record for incurring more debt during his 8 years than all other Prime Ministers combined. Housing is less affordable than ever. This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister finally stop his inflationary spending so Canadians can keep a roof over their head?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I remind the honourable member, Madam Speaker, that Canada has the lowest deficit and debt in the G7. But times remain hard. We see that. We understand that. On housing affordability, what are we doing? The supply crisis that underpins the housing crisis in front of the country is one that requires building. That's why we've lifted GST for the purposes of rental construction on apartments. That's why we've made changes to the borrowing limit of the Canada Mortgage Bond. I don't want to get into the technical details because they are vast. The result is more homes built for Canadians. That's what we're going to continue to do.
The honourable member for Colonial Lake Country.
Well, Madam Speaker, the OECD says in the G7 that Canada has the biggest gap between housing prices and Canadian wages. The finance minister said her plan to bring down inflation is working, and yet it has soared to 4%. Mortgage interest costs have also soared now to 31%. So it's no wonder Mortgage Pro's recent survey showed 48% of young people say they've given up on ever owning a home. Now, this NDP Liberal government spending is driving up inflation, which is driving up interest rates, which is driving up mortgage interest costs. Will the Prime Minister finally stop his inflationary spending so Canadians can keep a roof over their head?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
There we go again, Madam Speaker. The contradictions just speak for themselves, but I'll highlight them for you. In July of 2022, we had inflation at over 8%. That is now down to 4%. Certainly not low enough, but we see progress on that front, Madam Speaker. I also hear all sorts of ideas from the other side, Madam Speaker, that won't have a tangible impact in terms of affordability. Let's just take pensions, by the way. Yes. I've heard nothing from that side at all with respect to Premier Smith's pension plan that would deplete the fund by 53%. Combine that with their focus or lack of focus on EI, they voted against all these measures that will...
L'honorable député de Manicouagan.
The honourable member for Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, let's talk about Chalk River, a project to bury nuclear waste near the Outaouais River. The chiefs of several First Nations have joined their voices to a broad opposition movement in Quebec. They are concerned about the impact on the river. They are concerned that there will be a nuclear landfill near their sacred lands. They are concerned, but no one consulted them, which is a direct violation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. When will this government finally listen to them and put an end to the Chalk River project?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Speaker, Canadians' health and safety, reconciliation, and protecting the environment are all major priorities. When it comes to our nuclear policy, the project is currently being reviewed by the Commission. And according to that review, all nuclear waste in Canada is being handled safely according to international standards in appropriate facilities, which are overseen by our world-class Nuclear Safety Commission. Thank you very much. The Honourable Member. Madam Speaker, the first thing to do would be to at least give a minimum amount of respect to the concerns of First Nations. Chief Heyman from the Kipawek Nation has written to the Prime Minister and never got an answer. The federal government should at least pause the Chalk River project and ensure that First Nations are listened to. But at the very least, could Ottawa do the very minimum when it comes to a nation-to-nation relationship? It should at least respond to the letter from the Kipawek Nation.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much for the question.
Speaker, I acknowledge that we have work to do on this file. I know that this is something that might be coming before the INAN committee, but we look forward to hearing from the chiefs, hearing from the opposite member, and working with them to ensure that we're fulfilling our obligations under UNDRIP and our duty to consult. Thank you.
The Honourable Selkirk into Lake Eastman.
We learned yesterday these Liberals are cutting another $1 billion from our armed forces. This is in addition to the $2.5 billion they already let lapse last year. But the Prime Minister has no problem on wasting taxpayer money and running up massive deficits on things like the $160 million for McKinsey, $54 million on the ArriveCan app, $20 million bonuses on the Bank of Canada executives, and let's not forget they allowed $4.6 billion of abuse under their COVID programs. These Liberals waste money on just about everything except our military. Why does the Prime Minister only cut spending when it hurts our troops?
That's right.
The Honourable Minister for National Defence.
Madam Speaker, I think we all remember when the Conservatives set back defence capability by years when they reduced defence expenditures below 1% of our GDP. But, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we are committed to the significant and strategic long-term investments that will ensure that CAF continues to function as an agile, combat-ready force, capable of making tangible contributions and delivering on our commitments. And at the same time, Madam Speaker, we must ensure that all expenditures are carefully controlled so that each dollar produces real value for Canadians. Thank you.
I would just ask members to keep their thoughts to themselves when they're not being recognized. The Honourable Member for Caribou Prince George.
This Prime Minister is failing our most vulnerable of Canadians. Our country is gripped in the worst drug and crime crisis in generations. And last night we learned that this Prime Minister and the BC NDP are using taxpayer dollars to fund a group that buys drugs on the black market and then hands them out on the streets of Vancouver. We can't get people into recovery, but we can perpetuate their addiction and support organized crime. When will this Prime Minister put a stop to his failed drug policy and finally take real action and end this crisis?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I don't think there's a single member of this House that doesn't mourn the tragic loss of anyone in this overdose crisis. But I have to say, Madam Speaker, to the member across the way, spreading misinformation about and conflating harm reduction and treatment loses lives rather than saving them. Madam Speaker, the provinces are responsible for providing safe supply, prescriptions, to clients who need help as they go through recovery. Madam Speaker, on this side of the House, we will continue to save lives. They should get on board with us with that, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member Sturgeon River Parkland.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years under this Liberal government, it's clear that the rights of victims and their families are not a priority. Correctional Services Canada, with the full knowledge of this government, transferred Canada's most notorious killer to a medium security prison. Public safety officials even wanted to keep it quiet, and victims' families were only notified after the fact. At committee, Conservatives are calling for this government to let victims' voices be heard, but the Liberals are refusing to allow it. Why is this Liberal government trying to cover up this outrageous affair, and why are they shamefully blocking the voices of victims from being heard?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Madam Speaker, it's clear that member opposite is distancing himself from the truth once again. In fact, all members of the committee came together to bring forward.
I'm sorry.
You can't do. She accused him of lying.
So I think that, you know.
The previous minister did as well, frankly.
Order. Order. I think all members on all sides actually have used these things. So I just want to say I want to ask members to please be careful with their words, and you can't do indirectly what you can't do directly. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, let me clarify the facts for the member opposite. What happened at Public Safety Committee was that all members of the committee came together to come forward to do a study on putting forward the rights of victims of crime, to look into how reclassifications are handled and how transfers are handled. And you know what happened, Madam Speaker? The Conservatives voted against it. They talk tough in front of the cameras, but when it comes to act, they do nothing.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Madam Speaker, after 8 years, the Liberals still don't seem to understand how to help our farmers, who are the ones who put food on our tables. With their partners in the Bloc Québécois, they seem to prefer forcing families into the street instead of getting rid of the carbon tax. In fact, they would like to see it radically increased. They are feeding the inflationary fire. They want to make the cost of living even higher. When you vote for the Bloc, you pay a high price. When will the Liberal Bloc coalition put an end to the infamous carbon tax and finally listen to our common sense conservatives? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to remind my honourable colleague that federal carbon pricing does not apply in Quebec. Quebec, for many years, has had its own cap-and-trade system. I'd also like to remind my colleague that common sense is certainly not to ignore the impacts of climate change on our farmers throughout the country, especially in Quebec. I often meet farmers who are experiencing the impacts of climate change, drought, too much heat, not enough heat, pests. We haven't heard anything from the Conservatives about what they would do to help our farmers face these problems.
The Hamilton Community Foundation's Vital Signs report says that for every new unit of affordable housing built, Hamilton is losing 23 units. It also confirms what tenants have already always known, that corporate landlords are evicting tenants to jack up the rents at a record rate while leaving Hamiltonians out in the cold. This Liberal government is leaving people to fend for themselves while big developers are cashing in on what's left of our city's rental apartment buildings. So, Madam Speaker, will this government adopt our NDP affordable housing plan to create an acquisition fund to save the affordable rentals left in Hamilton?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Madam Speaker, I know that member has a passion for dealing with homelessness and addressing issues of affordability more generally. This government has put substantial investment forward through the National Housing Strategy to combat homelessness. It is a difficult challenge for sure, but one that we're getting results on. It's not over, that fight continues, and combined with efforts to build more, lifting GST from rental construction, for example, the changes to the Canada Mortgage Bond borrowing limit. All of these things combined, and the bottom line is we're going to see more homes built, and affordability is the result from that, Madam Speaker.
Member for Hamilton Centre.
Madam Speaker, maybe the honourable member heard my question, but clearly he wasn't listening. Because if he were, he would know that the winter months are approaching and that it's going to be life or death for the increasing number of people who are being left onto the streets to live in tent encampments. Cities like Hamilton are facing double-digit property tax increases in order to fill the crucial gaps in funding for social housing. In Hamilton, that's a 7-year wait list. This is life or death, Madam Speaker. So, will this government immediately respond to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities' demand for direct funding in order to repair existing social housing units in order to address our 7-year wait list?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, we have been there for cities like Hamilton and other Canadian cities and towns through programs like Reaching Home, through the Rapid Housing Initiative, and in other ways to help not-for-profits that are on the ground doing the very hard work. I know that member cares obviously very much about this issue. I'm happy to have further discussions with him, but I go back to the point that we're going to advance issues around this by collaboration with the private sector, with the not-for-profit sector, with municipalities as well. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Northwest Territories.
Madam Speaker, tomorrow is National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It's a day that recognizes First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children who were separated from their families, their culture, and their communities. While the Leader of the Opposition fails to advance on Indigenous issues such as UNDRIP, which he voted against, our government will be there to work with Indigenous peoples. Can the Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations update the House on our government's record on reconciliation?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Madam Speaker, when it comes to Indigenous issues, the record of the Leader of the Opposition is almost as shameful as his comments.
Order. Just want to remind members that we need to ensure that we have respect here in the House, and I know that the honourable members would like to hear the answers. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, when it comes to Indigenous issues, the shameful record of the Leader of the Opposition on his voting is almost as shameful as his words where he said, instead of compensation for abuses suffered at the Indian residential schools, that Aboriginals need to learn the value of hard work. In contrast, our government has a record of historical firsts, the passing UNDRIP into law, the first ever Indigenous Language Commissioner, the first ever Indigenous Governor General, the first ever Indigenous Supreme Court Justice. I'll stand on record on our historic firsts every day, including the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation.
Again, there are some interruptions going on while members are speaking. Again, I would just ask members to please hold off to any questions they may have or thoughts. Order. 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 Again, if individuals want to have conversations, they should take them out. Order.
This is coming from a guy that called
Order.
Indigenous women crackers.
If this continues, someone's going to end up losing a question. So, questions and comments? The honourable member for Bow River. Oh, sorry. Calgary Heritage.
8 long years of incompetent NDP Liberal government. Diplomatic disaster after diplomatic disaster. 1 in 5 Canadians are skipping meals. Crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder rage across our streets. A carbon tax making gas, groceries, and home heating more expensive. A tax that does nothing to achieve climate targets. A tax inflating everything, devastating everyone. When will the Prime Minister finally axe the tax?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, last week during the United Nations Climate Ambition Summit in New York, I was at an event with West Kelowna's Fire Chief Jason Brolin. Chief Brolin vividly described the trauma of fighting this summer's massive wildfires, of sending his team into danger, of fighting to protect homes and lives. It was a miracle that no one died in Kelowna. He called it a once-in-a-lifetime fire, but then told us it was the second once-in-a-lifetime fire he has faced in 20 years. That's the impacts of climate change, Madam Speaker.
Honourable member for Bow River.
Madam, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, Alberta farmers and families are paying more tax than ever. When you tax Stamp Seeds that grows the food, Reimer Trucking that ships the food, Gross Farms that processes the food, Sunterra Market who sells the food, you're taxing everyone who buys the food. This Prime Minister is just not worth it. Alberta farmers need to keep feeding the world. Will the Prime Minister axe his carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, we've seen the impact of climate change devastating provinces right across this country and impacting most significantly our farmers. In winter, we saw record cold temperatures leading to damaged homes, businesses, and crop results. Canadian farmers are on the front line of climate change, and that is exactly why, Madam Speaker, we're investing nearly $500 million in programs like the Agricultural Technology Program and the Climate Solutions Program, and we'll continue to do everything that is necessary to help our farmers deal with the increasing effects of climate change. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lisleck, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Madam Speaker, the Bloc is doing its best to convince Quebecers that the carbon tax has no impact in Quebec. Nothing could be further from the truth. Everything that is transported from one province to another and ends up in our stores costs more because of this tax. Everything, including voting for the Bloc, is more expensive. After 8 years of this government, many Quebecers are feeling the pinch. Will this Prime Minister finally cancel this costly Bloc Liberal tax? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Madam Speaker, I find those attacks on the Bloc very mean. But if the Conservatives had any interest at all in the economy in Quebec, they would have highlighted the historic announcement yesterday. We're going to create 3,000 jobs. We're going to look to the future and produce the greenest batteries in the world, Madam Speaker. 3,000 direct jobs, many more indirect jobs, green batteries in cars around the world, and they're not even talking about it. That's what the Conservatives are about. They don't care about Quebec at all. The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lisleck, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Madam Speaker, the Bloc said it wanted to radically increase the carbon tax, while the Liberals granted their wish. There's a second carbon tax that also applies in Quebec. According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, it will add 17 cents to the price of a litre of gasoline. The Bloc Liberal Alliance is always looking to dig deeper into Quebecers' pockets. It doesn't make any sense, Madam Speaker. Will the Prime Minister put an end to his inflationary taxes? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Madam Speaker. In 2023, It's unbelievable and even immoral that a political party that wants to form the government has nothing to say about climate change. When tens of thousands of people were displaced this summer because of forest fires, we could smell the smoke in New York and even in Europe. And the official position of the Conservative Party of Canada was that climate change don't exist. When it costs tens of billions of dollars to Canadians, it's scandalous, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Madam Speaker, it's very concerning what Radio-Canada has revealed about the closeness between the big GMO companies and the federal government. They're so close that they play on the same team, dubbed the Tiger Team. A team of lobbyists from giants such as Bayer, but also federal officials who allegedly drafted the genome editing regulations together. It's worse than the fox in the henhouse. It's the fox in charge of the henhouse. Will the government mandate truly independent experts to re-examine all the regulatory changes made under the Tiger Team?
Minister for National Defence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we've had extensive consultations with people from the organic, conventional, and seed sectors to find new food production solutions to feed the world's growing population. It is common practice for the government to actively engage with implicated stakeholders when discussing regulatory matters. The Tiger Team process was intended as a time-limited mechanism through which multiple stakeholders in the grain supply chain would have an opportunity to provide their views on a very complex topic of plant breeding and innovation. And, Madam Speaker, we will continue doing all that we can to support Canada's farmers and farm families.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Madam Speaker, it makes no sense to let the people who make money from a product decide the rules that apply to their product. It's even worse when we're talking about food and people's health. How can we let a company like Bayer write the rules on GMOs and genome editing? We now need to reassure people there is a breach of trust. Only a rigorous review of the regulatory update by truly independent experts can repair this total lack of judgment on the part of the government. When will it launch this review? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for his question. This is why myself, the former Minister of Agriculture and Health, have worked together to put in place the reforms he's talking about. That's what led to the federal government's announcement that there will no longer be pesticides used on federal lands, which led to a review of the way we approve pesticides in Canada, and that we allow more independent scientists to look at the review of each of these pesticides. We are undertaking that review that the honourable colleague is asking us to do. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For Miramichi Grand Lake.
Madam Speaker, Atlantic Canadians are struggling to pay for their groceries, gas, and home heating. Meanwhile, the Atlantic Liberal MPs support measures to quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. Atlantic Liberal MPs have continued to support carbon taxes since 2015. Will the Atlantic Liberal MPs vote on the Conservative motion next week to axe the tax so Atlantic Canadians can afford gas, groceries, and home heating?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
For his important question. Madam Speaker, let's talk about what's important for Atlantic Canadian. Earlier this week, I stood here and listened to Conservative and Atlantic Conservative from Atlantic Canada vote and are voting against the Atlantic Accord that gives Canada an opportunity, gives Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador an opportunity to find prosperity and also meet our green goals. Madam Speaker, I'm hoping that they vote for the Atlantic Accord and those changes to help Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada. Thank you.
The honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Madam Speaker, they've already ruined one tidal project, and I invite the member opposite to tell the people of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia choosing between fueling their car and purchasing groceries how the carbon tax is not punishing them every single day. Atlantic Liberal MPs allege they are not in favour of the carbon taxes while back home, but have supported it 23 times since 2015. Again, they claim that they now are against it. The carbon tax, will they put their money where their mouth is and vote next week to axe the tax?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
I would like to remind my honourable colleague that his party campaigned on putting in place a price on pollution in Canada in the 2021 election. But what I find interesting, and I would like to pick on what my colleague was saying, why is the Conservative Party opposing the development of clean energy in Canada? Like the moratorium that Premier Smith has put in place in Alberta, which is putting at risk $30 billion of investment in renewable energy in the clean technology sector. Thousands of jobs are at risk. Will the Leader of the Opposition stand to this House, Madam Speaker, and explain to us whether or not he supports clean energy or not?
Yes, I know the honourable members there. I just want to remind members to please keep the tone down when someone else has the floor. The honourable member for Regina, Wisconsin.
Madam Speaker, according to Food Banks Canada, nearly 7 million Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. That's because farmers pay the carbon tax on the food they grow. Truckers pay the carbon tax on the food they transport. Grocers pay the carbon tax on the food they refrigerate. And all of those carbon taxes get passed on to the consumer. Madam Speaker, will this Liberal NDP government cancel its plan to increase its inflationary carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Fire Chief Brolin of West Kelowna said another thing that stuck with me. He said Kelowna spent more than $20 million battling the summer's wildfires, and that insurance losses would triple that amount. What could we have accomplished if we'd used the same amount of money proactively, Chief Brolin asked. He said money spent fighting fires was spent on the wrong end of the problem. And he said that at an event in support of carbon pricing, Madam Speaker, a proven policy designed to reduce emissions that are driving climate change and more intense wildfires and floodings all across our nation and all across the world.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in our hearts and minds, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation reminds us to reflect on the consequences of colonialism on Indigenous people. It's an opportunity for Canadians to reflect on the tragic history of the residential school system. This day honors the children who never returned home. Can the Minister share some of the ways that we will be marking this day? The Honourable Minister of Heritage Canada. I thank my colleague from Châteauguay-Lacolle for her question. Listening to Indigenous voices and amplifying them is a way to mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. On Wednesday, I had the opportunity to participate in the viewing of Bones of Crows, a series produced by Mary Clemens with Indigenous actors that tells us about the history of residential schools and how the Cree people and others contributed to our common history. The partnership with CBC allows the voices of Indigenous people to be heard so that together we can honor truth and create spaces for healing.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Ranchers know that their herds are crucial to our grasslands, environment, food security and trade. Saskatchewan livestock producers also know that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. His inflationary policies and stifling carbon taxes are crippling our producers. They're stressed, winter is coming, and they need to keep their breeding herds alive. Time is running out. When will this NDP Liberal government provide its share of ag recovery funding? When?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Yeah, I want to thank the member opposite for the question. And I want to agree with her that Canadian farmers produce some of the highest quality agricultural products around the world. And that's one of the reasons our government, alongside our provinces and territories, are investing $3.5 billion in the next 5 years through new sustainable Canadian agricultural partnerships. We've also invested nearly $2 billion in supply-managed farmers and processors, as well as $500 million in environmental programs like the Agricultural Clean Technology Program and the Climate Solutions Program. And, Madam Speaker, I want to assure the member opposite and all members of this House that we'll continue to do everything that is necessary to support the important work of our Canadian farmers.
The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, for 3 years, the residents of Bobcaygeon have been waiting for repairs of the Lock 32 swing bridge. The lack of action from Parks Canada has left the town angry and frustrated. Precious tourist dollars have left, along with several businesses who just can't wait anymore. While the minister responsible is busy gifting millions to bolster infrastructure in communist China, he ignores the pleas of rural Canadians. If the minister is too busy supporting the Communist Party in Beijing, will he please hand this file over to someone who can do the job?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would actually take issue with the fact that the member is accusing one of the most respected institutions in our country, Parks Canada, of not doing its job. They are one of the most liked institution, most trusted institution in Canada. I will work with the officials of Parks Canada to ensure that this issue is dealt with in the most rapid possible terms. Thank you.
Member Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Thank you, Speaker. I was actually saying the minister can't do his job because not only one bridge is out, one federal bridge, a second bridge, the village of Balsover, 3 years and counting, no bridge. There's actually a documented case where someone died of a heart attack. The family could see the ambulance on the other side of the road because it could not get over. Wow. 3 years, 2 bridges, 2 communities cut in half. When will the minister do his job and get these bridges fixed?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I said, I will be talking with Parks officials to ensure that these problems are solved as quickly as possible. Thank you.
The honourable member for Hamilton East Stony Creek.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This weekend, Canadians in my riding of Hamilton East Stony Creek and across the country will honour the victims and survivors of the residential school system as we seek to address the harmful legacy of residential schools and reflect on our own commitment to reconciliation. For generations, Indigenous peoples have kept their culture and language, showing great resilience in the face of discrimination and mistreatment by colonial systems. Canada has a responsibility to address the truth and support their healing. Madam Speaker, in my community, people want to know how our government is working towards truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples.
Good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for that very important question. And I'm grateful to see Canadians across the country finding their own special ways to commemorate this important day. Let me be clear. As a government, we believe that truth and reconciliation need to be at the heart of absolutely everything that we do, and we are committed to doing the work. After Harper refused for years, we launched the inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Today, more than 96% of First Nations have access to clean drinking water, with a pathway for the remaining 4%. After decades of neglect, we have helped communities build, renovate, and retrofit 31,000 homes and counting. We will continue working with Indigenous peoples to build a new relationship based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership, and that's reconciliation. Thank you.
Honourable member for Windsor West.
Speaker, Canadians are putting their heart and soul into creating content for this entire country and the world to enjoy. And on TikTok, they're left out of their creator fund to be paid for their work. It's unfair. TikTok compensates its creators in the United States and Europe, but Canadians are left behind. Why are the Liberals allowing this abuse? These content creators are workers. They deserve to be paid. Madam Speaker, worker rights is my Roman Empire. So will this government start working for young people, ensure Canadian content creators are compensated fairly?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, our government is proud to support our creators all over the country. They're amongst the best in the world. Absolutely. They are sharing our stories, every Canadian stories, and it's really important that we keep on supporting them. This is why we brought forward the Bill C-11, and through this new bill, we're going to bring in new revenue so that we can better support our creators in Canada. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to raise the concern of the lawyers representing the Sequatlam First Nation. Just in time for National Day of Reconciliation, we're violating, and I say we, because thanks to the Liberals, we own the Trans Mountain Pipeline. We are violating a sacred commitment made to that First Nation. Their lawyer has asked for this, that at least before they start construction on October 2nd, the Canadian Energy Regulator provide reasons so this First Nation can pursue its legal rights of appeal. Will the government ensure construction doesn't begin until reasons are provided?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much, and I know this issue matters a great deal to our colleague. I will point out, however, and as the Minister of Finance said earlier this week, it's an independent decision that was reached by an independent agency. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
On appelle au règlement l'honorable député de Louis.
On a point of order, the honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Madam Speaker, during statements, there's a code of conduct in this House, and from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to apologize to the member for Hull Aylmer, who I interrupted during his wonderful statement. I appreciate that. I appreciate the honourable member's apology. I know it wasn't just him, but I do appreciate his honesty.
Points of order, the honourable member for Lakeland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is with a heavy heart that I just want to rise to address an exchange stemming from question period. I am a descendant of the Bear family from the Broken Head Ojibwe First Nation in Manitoba, so I raise this with grave concern and seriousness. The Prime Minister's pick for the Parliamentary Secretary for Crown Indigenous Relations, who mischaracterized our leader earlier in question period and was focusing on words, actually said, "Why do I assume every skinny Aboriginal girl is on crystal meth or pills? Hashtag too much APTN." I would beg all members of Parliament here to treat the issues, particularly of deep concern to Indigenous Canadians in every corner of their country, and all of us who are descended from them, and non-Indigenous Canadians who are treaty partners, to take these issues seriously with the gravity that they deserve and stop this name-calling, impugning motives, and mischaracterizations of words. These topics deserve this seriousness. That's why Harper's Conservative government apologized for residential schools and launched Truth and Reconciliation.
I think we're getting more into points of debate. I would just say that, I don't have all of the context from the honourable member. I didn't hear all of the statement that she made. I didn't hear that during question period as far as for the statements that she had made, or the specific language used. So I would tend to think that that's more a point of debate. I have another point of order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to table the documents that the Leader of the Opposition made when he was a Member of Parliament here, when he talked about that his view was that instead of compensation, the actual word from the Leader of the Opposition was, "My view is that we need to engender the value..."
I'm sorry. All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. There's no... Point of order. Point of order. The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Coming out of question period, comments from the member from Sydney, Victoria. Just like to table a unanimous consent to table this document, reminding Canadians that during the first Truth and Reconciliation Day, the Prime Minister spent it surfing in Tofino.
I've already getting some no's, but I'll ask the question. All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. We don't have unanimous consent. I have a point of order here from the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, I do want to say, Madam Speaker, to thank you for your valiant efforts today maintaining order through the question period. Et aussi un grand merci à le député.
And also a huge shout out to the member for Louis Saint Laurent for his apologies. He's a model for everyone to follow.
Speaker, it can be taken up later. And I know that if I heard it clearly, it may end up in Hansard. It wasn't something said by the honourable member for Lethbridge, but it was while she had the floor, a male voice was heard quite clearly saying the word cowardly. I think it may end up in Hansard unless someone attends to it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
It's not something that I have heard. I'm sure that we can double check the records and come back to the House if need be. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre has a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Certainly emotions run high here. We're debating. On September 30th, it's the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and I find it really abhorrent that we're using this time when we're supposed to be lifting up survivors to get into petty political arguments on the backs of survivors. So I would like this to, I'm encouraging members to stop this behavior. Thank you.
I appreciate the point of order that was raised. Again, I think it falls on debates, but I do want to remind everyone that we should be respectful of each other in the House. There's ways to debate our different points of views, and we have to also be mindful of the occasion that we are going to be marking. The honourable member for Caribou Prince George has also a point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise with heavy heart as well, too. As many know, my family is First Nations as well. And Madam Speaker, the comments that came from the member from Sydney, Victoria, on a day before Truth and Reconciliation Day is indeed damaging, Madam Speaker. And I remind this House that not only did the member from Sydney, Victoria use disparaging remarks towards Indigenous women prior to his elected life, but our Prime Minister also heckled Indigenous protesters and thanked them for their donation. And Madam Speaker, through you, I ask for unanimous support to table a document that highlights that our Prime Minister thanked Indigenous protesters for their donation when they were protesting his inability to cure or to fight the potable water situation on our First Nations communities throughout our country. And Speaker, this is shameless. And through you, I seek unanimous support to table this document. Thank you.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. There's no unanimous consent. We have one more point of order. The honourable member for Lakeland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Also, as a person who wrote my undergraduate honors thesis 21 years ago about harm and responsibility in the residential school system and called for apology and compensation from government, among many other measures, I forgot when you allowed me the time earlier to actually ask for unanimous consent to table the documents that show the Prime Minister's pick for Indigenous Crown relations, that show him making misogynist and anti-Indigenous comments. And from the comment from our colleague, who talked about how she's urging people to not make political points. I agree, that's the point of me rising, and I hope I'm taken in good faith for that principle, and she should definitely talk to her Liberal Cabinet Minister colleagues.
I just want to remind members, if they're going to be wanting tabling a report or tabling a document, I don't know that they have to go into in-depth detail about what the document is, but I do want to ask the members, all those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. No, we don't have unanimous consent. We have one more point of order. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
I'm very saddened, Madam Speaker, by what is occurring. Again, I'm going to urge all parliamentarians, if they have any level of decency, to stop using residential school survivors for political gains. This is inappropriate and it's violent. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Again, I appreciate all of the points of orders that have been made. I think that I want to say that if members could please be very respectful in the languages that they use, that would actually allow the House to function much better. Orders of the day. Oh, sorry. Yes, let me put my glasses on. Tabling of documents. Introduction of government bills. Déclaration de ministre. Rapport de délégation interparlementaire. Présentation de rapport de comité. Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motions. Présentation de pétitions. The honourable member for Hull-Elmer.
La présidente, c'est mon devoir.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of Canadians, and especially postdoctoral researchers and graduate students, I'd like to present this petition, which asks the government to increase the value of grants given by the three research organizations to graduate students and postdoctoral researchers, to increase that by 50%. So to increase by 50% those grants and increase by 100% the number of grants given to postdoctoral researchers by the three organizations, and to increase by at least 10% a year the budget of the three organizations that earmark money for faculties for research activities over the next 10 years in order to increase remuneration for graduate students and postdoctoral researchers. This petition was signed by 1,841 people.
Colonial Lake Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have two petitions to table today. So I'm tabling a petition from constituents in Kelowna Lake Country and surrounding area. I know I have to summarize. And this petition talks about the combination of Carbon Tax 1 and Carbon Tax 2, which will mean that Canadians will pay an extra 61 cents for each litre of gas. It refers to making life more expensive for Canadians and a cost of living crisis by implementing a second carbon tax, demonstrating how out of touch the Liberal Prime Minister is, and how the Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed that both carbon taxes will have a net cost of up to $4,000 depending on the province in which they live per family. So therefore, the petitioners are calling on the Government of Canada to recognize this failure and to immediately cancel the clean fuel regulations. I have a petition here today, Madam Speaker, and I know I need to summarize. This is from residents in Kelowna Lake Country and surrounding area, where it refers to Health Canada proposing to significantly change natural health product regulations, where natural health products include basic everyday products, used by Canadians as part of their proactive health care. And this will cause consumer prices to rise significantly and consumer choices to decline drastically, and that's a major concern. It calls on the Minister of Health to work with the industry to accurately reflect the size and scope of the industry, and the new regulatory changes should only be considered once the self-care framework is adjusted, backlogs are cleared, operations are running efficiently, and policies and procedures are in place to ensure stable operations and selection of natural health product choices continues for all Canadians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member of Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to present a petition today on behalf of residents of Saanich Gulf Islands concerned about the multiple threats to the highly endangered forest and sea-dwelling bird, the fantastic little marbled murrelet. I will not digress into my experiences with marbled murrelet chicks, but it's quite the story. But they are endangered because their habitat is being logged. They specifically dwell only in and nest in old-growth forests. The marbled murrelet is protected under the Migratory Birds Convention, as the petitioners point out. They call on the federal government to act to protect this critical habitat for the marbled murrelet by working with the provinces, but particularly British Columbia, to protect the last remaining old-growth forest in British Columbia, which is still being logged. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise to present a petition which reads, whereas the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has warned us repeatedly that rising temperatures over the next 2 decades will bring widespread devastation and extreme weather, and where we are certainly feeling the impacts in Canada today with the increased flooding, wildfires, and extreme temperatures, and whereas addressing the climate crisis requires a drastic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and whereas in 2021 the federal government committed to cap and cut emissions from the oil and gas sector to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. We, the undersigned, call upon the Government of Canada to move forward immediately with bold emissions caps for the oil and gas sector that are comprehensive in scope and realistic in achieving the necessary targets that Canada has set to reduce emissions by 2030. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you so much, Speaker. It's a real privilege to stand up in this House and bring the concerns of Canadians to this place. And I want to present this first one on behalf of Canadians who continue with their concerns in this regard. It is well established that the risk of violence against women increases when they're pregnant. Currently, the injury or death of preborn children as victims of crime are not considered aggravating circumstances for sentencing purposes in our Criminal Code of Canada. So they indicate that justice requires that an attacker who abuses a pregnant woman and her preborn child be sentenced accordingly, and the sentence should match the crime. The second one that I'm presenting is on behalf of Canadians that certainly believe that they have the right to be protected against discrimination. We all do. Canadians can and do face political discrimination, and it's a fundamental Canadian right to be politically active and vocal. It's in the best interest of Canadian democracy to protect public debate and the exchange of different ideas. And Bill C-257 seeks to add protection against political discrimination to the Canadian Human Rights Act. Therefore, we, the undersigned citizens and residents of Canada, call upon the House of Commons to support Bill C-257, which bans discrimination on the basis of political belief or activity, and to defend the rights of Canadians to peacefully express their political opinions. Thank you.
Member Sturgeon River Parkland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to present this position on behalf of Canadians who are very concerned about the rise in discrimination against political belief and activity. They're calling on the House of Commons to pass Bill C-257, which will enshrine in the Canadian Human Rights Act that political belief and activity are not subject to discrimination. As we live in a world where fear of political retribution is leading to increasing polarization, the undersigned believe that in order to preserve Canada's a peaceful and strong democracy, that legislation like this must pass. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to table a number of petitions in the House today. The first petition is in support of private members' Bill C-257, a bill that I've put forward, and a parallel Bill S-257 that's been presented in the Senate by Senator Tulajan. This bill would add political belief and activity as prohibited grounds of discrimination in the Canadian Human Rights Act. We're seeing an increase in instances where individuals are discriminated against or threatened with discrimination on the basis of their political views. Not only is this an unjustified form of discrimination like many other, but this has a chilling effect on democratic deliberation, according to the petitioners. So petitioners call on the House to support Bill C-257, which bans discrimination on the basis of political belief or activity, and to defend the rights of all Canadians to peacefully express their political opinions. The second petition notes the elevated risk that pregnant women face of violence and the absence of specific targeted protections for women in this situation, and the fact that the current law does not recognize the impact if an act of assault results in the death of the preborn child. Petitioners call on the House to legislate that the abuse of a pregnant woman or the infliction of harm on a preborn child is an aggravating circumstance for sentencing purposes in the criminal code. The next petition deals with the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China. Petitioners note that Falun Gong is a traditional Chinese spiritual discipline which consists of meditation exercises, moral teachings based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. The petitioners describe the campaign of persecution that have been targeting Falun Gong practitioners for now more than 20 years, as well as the work that was done by prominent Canadians, David Matas and the late, great David Kilgore, on revealing the forced organ harvesting, the targeted and targets in the present Falun Gong practitioners. Petitioners are therefore calling on the House and the government to take additional action to support Falun Gong practitioners to do more on organ harvesting, as well as to publicly call for an end to persecution of Falun Gong practitioners. The next petition that I'm tabling, and I think it'll be the final one for today, deals with the government's so-called feminist international policy. Now, petitioners note that the Muskoka Initiative, launched by the previous Conservative government, involved historic investments in the well-being of women and girls around the world, and that this initiative emphasized value for money, but also ensured that investments were in priorities identified by local women. Conversely, the Liberals' so-called feminist international assistance policy, according to petitioners, has shown a lack of respect for the cultural values and autonomy of women in the developing world by pushing organizations that violate local laws and push certain objectives at the expense of international development priorities that local women have, such as clean water, access to basic nutrition, and economic development. The petitioners also note that the Liberals' approach to international development for women and girls has been criticized by the Auditor General for failing to measure results. Therefore, petitioners call on the Government of Canada to align international development spending with the approach taken in the Muskoka Initiative, focusing international development dollars on meeting the basic needs of vulnerable women around the world, rather than pushing ideological agendas that may conflict with local values in developing countries. And they also want to see the government do more to measure outcomes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, présentation de pétitions, questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask that all questions be allowed to stand.
Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Orders of the day, Government Orders, Government Bills, Commons, resuming consideration at second reading of Bill C-50, Canadian Sustainable Jobs Act.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland had 3.5 minutes remaining of questions and comments. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for the Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland. I thought the Honourable Member was rising on the point of order, but no. Sturgeon River Parkland, yep.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In all of this debate about the Sustainable Jobs Act, what I haven't heard is an explanation from this Liberal NDP government of a credible plan to replace over 25% of Canada's exports. Petroleum and petroleum products account for over $100 billion, over 25% of Canada's annual exports. These are absolutely necessary for the protection of the value of the Canadian dollar. And if the Sustainable Jobs Act achieves what it intends to achieve, it will cripple our exports, cripple the Canadian dollar, which will lead to a massive increase in inflation, which we're already dealing with. And this massive increase in inflation will necessarily be countered by further radical interest rate hikes from the Bank of Canada. So I'm going to ask my honourable colleague if she can explain the deep economic consequences of this policy that this government simply doesn't have a credible plan to deal with. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question, and of course I touched on this in my remarks earlier, but he's exactly right, and that's exactly why Canadians can see countries around the world who are 40 years ahead of us on this agenda now rolling back all of those measures and doing the very things that Conservatives here at home have been asking for this government to do to protect our citizens' cost of living, future opportunities, standard of living, jobs, keep our cost of living down, and control and bring down the cost of living crisis that this government's anti-private sector, anti-energy, anti-resource development, command and control policies have created. But he touches on a thing that I really find the most important about this debate. It is that the government, the NDP Liberals, they owe these answers to Canadians about how they're going to achieve the targets that they set on these timelines. So far, it's causing all economic gain and all economic pain and no environmental gain. So that's why conservatives and Canadians are asking if it's worth the cost. That's the government's job to answer.
We have time for a brief question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Honourable Member for Kingston and the Islands. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And, you know, I understand that this member cares deeply for the oil and gas sector. She talks about it quite a bit, and I appreciate her prerogative on that. But, you know, even if you don't think that there's a future in clean tech and you don't think that there's opportunity here, this still gives the opportunity to unlock the potential of new jobs in a clean sector. And all you have to do, Madam Speaker, is open your eyes and look around throughout the world. This industry is really in a growth stage right now. Why wouldn't, even if you don't necessarily agree that it's the future, why wouldn't you still take a very easy risk on betting that it will be a positive outcome for the Canadian economy?
Brief answer from the member for Lakeland.
We do agree it's the future, which we've said multiple times. We just recognize reality that the oil and gas sector in Canada still remains the most abundant, available, affordable source of energy for most Canadians throughout this country, and is also the biggest investor in clean tech and alternative energies. What these governments want to do is kill the very sector that leads to innovation and technology. They should answer more questions about how on earth they're going to meet their targets in 2035 when they can't get critical minerals out of the ground, when they're holding back the ring of fire, when interties don't exist, when there's no grid capacity, and there's no end-user distribution system for Canadians on the back end. Conservatives are saying, answer the questions. How is this going to get done? When? Why? In what way? Who's paying for it? And then maybe people can have confidence in their plan. But we all know they're not.
The honourable member's time is up. Sorry. Reprise de débat. L'honorable député de...
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Repentigny. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Bloc Québécois is in favor of the energy transition, as well as a just transition for workers and their families. For a long time, we've been saying that we should change Canada's energy policy to make it compatible with our commitments to keep the increase in global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's the Canadian government's commitment, and as well as a global commitment. So we would propose to immediately stop increasing production of fossil energy and gradually reduce the total production of oil and gas by 2030, instead of increasing it. We propose redirecting the money that's currently being invested in fossil fuels, including the generous liberal subsidies, redirecting this money to developing renewable energies and clean tech. We stand with workers in the energy sector. In fact, right from the beginning of the misguided expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, we proposed abandoning the project and earmarking the money set aside for it, redirecting the money to the energy transition for the Canadian West by investing in solutions for workers and their families. We agreed that all stakeholders in the transition, businesses, workers, and the public, we believe that they should all work together. We have always recognized that the energy transition represents a major challenge for economic sectors affected by the transition, and that the powers that be must plan the transition carefully, especially in workplaces, and put into place retraining and other measures to support workers.
In this respect, the Bloc Québécois supports the recommendations of environmental groups and labor organizations for legislation on a just transition. Environmental groups and labor organizations have had the wisdom to join forces in their demands for this just transition because they've understood that the success of the energy transition and the fight against climate change must include the economic and social success of companies, workers, and communities that would be affected by the changes to come. I remember in one of the times I participated in the COP at the UN, Antonio Guterres clearly said that there will be no transition without workers. They are part of the solution. It's just a matter of solidarity. The Bloc Québécois has listened to environmental groups and labor organizations and will support their demands and recommendations to the government. We believe that a Just Transition Act should have the following elements. First, let's call a spade a spade. It should be called the Just Transition Act, quite simply. Then, it should set out objectives and principles that are clear and based on Canada's international climate commitments, responsibilities to Indigenous people, and just transition obligations in Canada. This act should have a consensus-building approach based on social dialogue that respects the democratic dialogues already underway in the provinces and territories, particularly Quebec, respecting the democratic choices of this Quebec nation and the rights and aspirations of Indigenous peoples. This act should provide measures to respect Canada's just transition objectives and principles, including those related to climate, Indigenous peoples, the need to leave no one behind, groups deserving equity, and those suffering inequities related to environmental degradation, because it's clear that there are people who've not really participated in increasing greenhouse gases, and their environment is directly affected by this damage, and I'm thinking of Indigenous people in particular. And this act, the mandate and mission of government-created bodies, must never exceed the legislative powers of the federal parliament. They must make recommendations to the federal government in matters that fall within its jurisdiction and that can be put towards transition. There should be requirements for regional and sectoral planning and reporting along the lines of those established by the Carbon Neutrality Accountability Act. And there should be adequate funding mechanisms by establishing funding agreements with the provinces based on real greenhouse gas reduction targets to finance the projects required for the transition. Unfortunately, Bill C-50 is not a just transition bill. In fact, the Liberal government no longer dares use the term, which seems to frighten them. Bill C-50 is a bill that proposes to create committees to make recommendations to the minister who will be designated as being responsible for this regarding workforce training. That's it. Workforce training, while not the only aspect of just transition, is certainly part of the discussion and an area to be taken into account in transition planning. However, if we wish to legislate on workforce training, we might need to take into account the legislative jurisdictions of the various governments and consider formal agreements that already exist between the governments of Canada and the various provinces. Unfortunately, in this respect, the government seems to have completely forgotten Quebec in the process of drafting Bill C-50. Its secretariat, its consultative agency, well, that already exists in Quebec. The federal government has never understood the world of labor in Quebec. Bill C-50 was drafted in ignorance of Quebec's reality, not for the first time. Ignorance of our laws, our policies, our democratic choices, and above all, in ignorance of the Quebec-Ottawa agreements on workforce training. For decades, Quebec has expressed its demands with regard to the workforce issue. During the 1990s, discussions between Quebec and Canada on this subject mainly concerned the repatriation of federal funding earmarked for vocational or technical training. The aim was to make up for the federal government's financial disengagement that needed to be rectified. On June 22, 1995, the Quebec National Assembly passed the Act to foster the development of workforce training. With this legislation, Quebec demonstrated its leadership in workplace training. The Quebec reform laid the foundation for a new model based on partnerships, which would make a major contribution to Quebec's economic development. And in 1998, we saw the creation of the Commission des Partenaires des Marchés du Travail. That it's now 25 years old. So this CPMT was created when, in the wake of repatriation of active employment measures from the federal government to the Quebec government. So that wasn't just the other day. That was 1997, 1998. In 1997, the governments of Quebec and Canada signed the Canada-Quebec Labour Market Agreement in Principle and the Canada-Quebec Labour Market Implementation Agreement a few months later. The Commission was created a few months later. What is the Commission? It's a national consultative body that contributes to the development of government policies and measures in the fields of labor and employment. To identify innovative solutions and build consensus, the CPMT coordinates national consultation forums to resolve specific employment-related issues. The CPMT brings together representatives of employers, of labor, the educational community, community organizations, and certain economic and social ministries. And in addition, there are regional councils from workforce partners, and I was part of one of them, the Regional Council in Montérégie, and there are all of these sector committees for different areas. So we need to understand that the CPMT and all of these organizations, it's the only one of its kind in Canada. In Quebec, well, this is a source of pride. The creation of the Commission and Emploi Québec shows Quebec taking leadership. It's not a simple detail in history. So it's somewhat disappointing that no one in the federal government thought of it. In the opinion of the officials who presented Bill C-50 to us, at no point in the process of drafting the bill did the government consider Quebec's particular situation. Once again. Unfortunately, this reveals the general state of mind of this government, which has so little regard for the sovereignty of Canadian provinces or for the Quebec difference that it forgets the agreements that it concluded itself. That said, the government still has the opportunity to rectify this situation. It is necessary to develop legislation that takes into account the agreements the federal government has signed with the provinces, especially Quebec, which has its own model of partnership and cooperation. The government must introduce in the bill an element of asymmetry that makes it compatible with the most recent Canada-Quebec agreements on workforce development. To do this, it must come to an agreement with the Government of Quebec. We also need to make sure that if money is earmarked to support the Sustainable Jobs Action Plan, that the minister must produce by 2025 and every 5 years thereafter, while that Quebec gets its fair share of that money and that it goes through the Government of Quebec. You may hear that in other areas, Madam Speaker. So if the government wants the support of the Bloc Québécois to develop just transition legislation, it must do its homework. It needs to redo its homework and write a legislative proposal that is not ignorant of Quebec's laws, as well as existing agreements between the governments of Quebec and Canada. We could say good luck, but we have hope that the minister will understand our concern. I'll give you an example. For once in history, they've understood. In the case of daycare centers, the government understood that Quebec had been a forerunner and that it should not intervene in such a way as to destructure Quebec's CPE network. The government has even publicly stated that it took inspiration from Quebec. So they can copy-paste that approach to workforce training. We simply don't understand why, when it comes to workforce training, the government hasn't realized that the same logic should apply. This must absolutely be rectified. While it's back at the drafting table, the government should also listen to environmental groups and unions who have specific demands and who are expecting, as we were, a comprehensive Just Transition Act aligned with Canada's climate commitments, not just a bill creating committees to talk about workforce training. Finally, the Bloc Québécois must denounce the Liberal government's calculated abandonment of the concept of just transition, even though the expression isn't something we came up with. I think it goes back to the 80s. That's when we started talking about this. The expression is enshrined internationally, notably in the Paris Agreement and the COP26 Declaration on Just Transition, to which Canada is bound. What are we afraid of? The government's decision to use the term sustainable jobs and no longer refer to just transition is in line, we believe, with the government's energy agenda. Indeed, if the energy transition doesn't happen because we're developing the oil sector, well, then we can't talk about a just transition. Oil sand jobs may be sustainable in the eyes of the government since they're here to stay because they're planning to have more oil projects under the federal government and applauded by the official opposition. Why are the Liberals and the NDP afraid of the expression just transition? What are they more afraid of? The Conservatives' word games with the Premier's name, or the Premier of Alberta, who said she would fight the idea of just transition with all the tools available to the Government of Alberta? Is that what they are afraid of? For our part, we believe that the federal government, if it wants to act to accompany the provinces in planning the energy transition, must engage in a frank and respectful dialogue with all the provinces and propose legislation that reflects the quality of this dialogue. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change and Natural Resources. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened attentively to the member opposite, and after yesterday, when we heard Conservatives say they were against fighting climate change, it's incredible. Does she not agree that it's very important that we continue fighting climate change? But on the federal side, and this bill is from the federal government, should we not be thinking about workers and how we can ensure we have sustainable jobs for the future in a carbon-neutral economy? Thank you. The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Yes, Madam Speaker, I thank my colleague for her question, and I listened to her speech this morning, and I had asked, she was talking about jobs in green technology, clean technology, renewable energy. In all of these new jobs, we need to apply the principles of the just transition, sustainable development, respecting Indigenous people, the social safety net. We need to respect the principles of this transition. But there's also a plan to reconvert jobs for workers who are currently in polluting industries that need to decline. That is where we need to focus. At all of the COP meetings I participated in, the discussions I had with organizations to defend the environment or labor organizations, that's what they've talked about. Workers in fossil fuel industries shouldn't bear the whole weight of the transition, but there needs to be a transition for that. The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I know that the member and I debate often from our opposing worldviews on the role and the necessity of oil and natural gas for Canada and the globe long into the future. But I certainly appreciate her comments on respecting provincial jurisdiction, and I know that we share that principle, and certainly the NDP Liberals think nothing of running roughshod over provincial governments with whom they disagree. I know that I sound like a broken record, but I do represent 9 Indigenous communities in Lakeland, and the truth is that the oil and gas sector, of course, and mining are the biggest private sector employers of Indigenous Canadians, with wages that are double the national average. So I wonder if she shares the same concern about setting realistic timelines and allowing those jobs to continue while that private sector continues to be the biggest investor in clean tech and alternative renewable energies. If she shares that concern, and also if she can tell us how the more than $7 million in GDP and the 438 businesses in oil and gas in Quebec will be replaced.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. But we've just concluded at the Environment Committee and Climate Change Committee a study proposed by the Conservatives on clean technology. But in that study, the witnesses who came told us that it was mainly SMEs who create jobs in clean technology. It's not really the oil companies. The oil companies give us smoke and mirrors talking about carbon capture and storage, which is false news, a false technique that isn't even effective yet. Maybe it will be in 10, 12 years. but oil companies are billionaires. And currently, the Conservatives are spokespeople for those oil companies who have billions of dollars but want consumers to pay for the climate change fight.
Comments? The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable colleague for her intervention. You know, I agree with her that we need a just transition that brings workers along. Something that I've offered to put forward is a guaranteed livable basic income, something that certainly could be paid for if we actually stopped funding big oil and instead put that money into funding people. I'm wondering if the honourable member agrees that we need to start supporting people. You know, I've said very often, I don't think people love oil and gas. I think they love feeding their families. They love paying for their houses. They like to eat. You know, we need a just transition that brings workers along. I know that climate activists are calling for a guaranteed livable basic income as one way to assist workers in transitioning. Does she agree with that proposal?
I just ask members to take their conversation outside. L'honorable député de Repentigny.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. As I said in my speech, workers in the fossil fuel industry shouldn't bear the burden of the energy transition themselves. We're thinking of workers, and Mr. Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, said it won't be possible to have the transition if we don't think about workers, if they're not with us to do it. And I know there are organizations, even in Alberta, beyond oil and gas, there are workers from that sector who want an energy transition. Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Allow me to thank and congratulate my honourable colleague, the member for Repentigny, for the quality of her very rich speech and the quality of her answers. When the Conservative member asked her a question, she didn't like the answer. She made noise the whole time, but my colleague answered nevertheless. So congratulations. A part that stood out to me in her speech, there she's starting again. She was saying that Ottawa doesn't understand how things work in the workforce in Quebec. Can she give us other examples on that? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Repentigny. I'd like to thank my colleague for everything he said. Yes, there's Bill C-50, but we're also going to go back to the Harper days, Budget 2013. And what was important about that budget was the Canadian employment subsidy. That was the main feature, and Quebec opposed that. And I remember at the time, people in the Conservative government were saying, well, we'll see what's going on in Scandinavia. And it was a PQ member who told the government, you don't have to look across the Atlantic, just look what's happening here in Quebec. And that's when the agreement started and the respect for our agreement. And so this isn't the first time Quebec's been ignored, but we're proud of what's happening in Quebec. And as I said in my speech, we started the daycare, and we're the pioneers in the environment too.
The
honourable member for Drummond. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I, in turn, would like to warmly congratulate my colleague from Repentigny on the quality of her speech and on her ability to stick to her guns even when people were heckling. So I congratulate her on that. Madam Speaker, I'm always surprised to see this Liberal government, which claims to be pro-environment and active in combating climate change, but at the same time they continue to invest heavily in the oil patch. Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask my colleague for Repentigny how she analyzes this. How does she see this Liberal approach to climate change? Is it perhaps that they're trying to please everyone and have it both ways with voters? Is there some other motivation behind this, a hidden agenda? The honourable member for Repentigny, 1 minute to answer. 1 minute? hopefully a bit more than a minute. It would take me hours to explain everything that's wrong with the government's approach to climate change. Look, this is no small thing. The former Liberal Environment Minister, Minister McKenna, said it didn't make any sense for Canada to be the second biggest increaser in oil production. So what I find to be a real pity is that what I'm hearing from ministers on the government side is that it's basically the same things you hear from the oil companies, basically. Resuming debate.
For Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to make a contribution to this debate, a debate that I think certainly in respect of the larger issue of climate change is the most important debate of our time. And we're called to try and navigate what is an increasingly more and more challenging, dangerous, and expensive climate crisis. And this summer, of course, was just the latest and most extreme example so far of what failure to take climate change seriously looks like. And you know, I grew up in a house where climate change was an important theme. At one time, the way of talking about it was global warming, and of course, NDP MPs were the first to raise the issue of global warming in the House of Commons as far back as the 1980s. And so this is a debate that many of us in Canada have been wanting to have for a long time. And of course, we have been debating climate change in various ways over the last decade or more. But I don't think that the quality of the debate has risen to the occasion. And that's not to say that particular people in the context of that debate haven't done a good job of presenting the kinds of ideas that I think we need in order to be able to adequately tackle the climate. But I think if you take a step back and you look at the debate as a whole, it has not served us well, and we're not where we need to be. It's not these are not my words, but I think they're helpful to kind of get a sense of some of the pitfalls in the climate debate. I've heard others say those pitfalls are kind of encapsulated by the 3 Ds, denial, delay, and despair. And there's certainly still, I would say, no shortage of denial, even in the House of Commons, in respect of the real threats that the climate pose to life on planet Earth, and also if things don't get that dire, real threats that are posed to the economy. And again, I would say this year we saw some of the worst examples so far of that. It seems to me for a number of years now, we've been in the unfortunate position of having to say that we've seen some of the worst examples. And if the folks who study these things for a living are to be believed, and I think they should be, you know, I think we're in for more bad weather events and other things that will not only have a cost in human life and property damage and all the rest, but to the very economy that proponents of denial often say they want to save. And so today's bill isn't perfect by any stretch, but it's an important part of putting an infrastructure in place in order to be able to deal with the economic impacts of climate change and to try and put workers at the center of that. Now, often you'll hear from opponents of legislation like this that this is all about just, you know, shutting down the oil and gas industry, and it's going to hurt workers and it's going to hurt the economy. But I want to take a moment to speak to that criticism. I don't think that that's true, frankly. And a lot of the pain that workers in the oil and gas industry have been experiencing, we've seen moments where, due to international pricing of fossil fuels falling, like I remember an important debate early on in the 42nd Parliament, would have been around 2016, 2017, not long after first being elected, the international price of Western crude plummeted, and it had some very real impacts for workers in Alberta and the oil and gas sector across the country. That was painful for them and painful for us to watch, and I think merited a response, again, that was centered on workers and how to support workers at that time. And I want to just take a moment to say that, the interests of the oil and gas industry and the interests of oil and gas workers are sometimes aligned, but not always. In fact, over the last couple of years, what we've seen is an increase in extraction, which I think if you listen to conservatives particularly, that can get lost in the noise. It sounds as if oil and gas companies are being told to shut down and cut production. That's actually not true. There are certainly some of us who think that unlimited and unbridled growth in extraction is a recipe to worsen the climate crisis. There is a reasonable debate to be had about what an appropriate amount of extraction every year could look like and what would be sustainable. But that's not the debate that we hear from conservatives. So over the last couple of years, what we've seen is a decrease in employment in oil and gas, which is why I think a lot of people who work in oil and gas feel that the sector is in trouble. But if you look at the corporate readouts, the fact is they're extracting more oil and gas than ever, and they're making more money than ever. And part of the way that they're doing that is by having very close political allies that they've worked for a long time to capture. Even to the point that Suncor recently held off on 1,500 layoffs that they made in a year where they had just doubled their previous year's profits almost. So, in 2022, Suncor made $2.74 billion in profit. And despite having one of their most profitable years ever, almost double the profits from 2021, which itself was a year of record profit, they decided to lay off 1,500 people. But they didn't just do that when it suited them. They did it when it suited their political allies in Alberta. They waited until after the Alberta election to announce those layoffs. It wasn't that long ago a story surfaced about Conservative MPs who, on the dime of a right-wing Hungarian think tank and an anti-carbon tax lobby in Canada, flew to the UK and, were treated to lavish dinners, including $600 of champagne and expensive meals, because they're part of a political and economic club that benefits from the profit making of the oil and gas industry, which I say, again, does not always mean something that directly benefits workers. And what we've seen is a decline in employment, even as we see an increase in production and profit in the oil and gas sector. So I think Canadians should be suspicious of the denial argument, because there's a lot of money in the oil and gas sector and a lot of people to benefit from that. What New Democrats are concerned to see is that workers in Alberta and across the country continue to have gainful employment, good union jobs where they can be assured of good workplace safety and health standards when they go to work, so that when they go to the shift in the morning, they come back at the end of the day, that they're paid well for the work that they perform. But, the economy isn't static. And the fact of the matter is that whether Canada seriously recognizes the threat that climate change represents to the planet and to our economy or not, our international allies and economic competitors are recognizing that. And as some in the House will know, I sit on the Finance Committee. We've heard from a number of people in the private sector that are talking about the incredible economic opportunities that decarbonization represents, the opportunities in renewable energy, the opportunities in the emerging and growing electric vehicle market. These are things, that's where the puck is going. And I would say of the oil and gas industry, particularly in Alberta, obviously the private sector has played a huge role in that. Obviously, a lot of people in the private sector made a lot of money. And obviously, a lot of Canadian workers have benefited over the decades from that in terms of stable and well-paying employment. But that industry was created with some very deliberate public policy and some very large investments. And that was the kind of foresight that a Peter Lougheed exhibited today. If you take that same wisdom and you apply it to today, what it entails is governments once again looking at the public policy agenda, putting into place favorable conditions for those markets of the future. And it's not to say that the oil and gas industry is going to disappear overnight. In fact, we've got a government right now that is pumping over $30 billion into a pipeline exactly because they don't believe the oil and gas industry is disappearing overnight. I think that was a poor use of public funds. I think the opportunity cost of investing over $30 billion in a pipeline instead of investing it in the new energy economy will ultimately not serve Canadians well, and that we could have created a lot of employment and helped position Canada far more competitively in the new energy economy had we spent those public dollars in the new energy economy instead of on a pipeline. So we've got a government that is very invested in fossil fuels. We've got an official opposition that no matter what the government does for the fossil fuel industry, including saying no to NDP calls for an excess profit tax on the oil and gas industry, which is something that even some conservative governments elsewhere have been willing to do. Can't get the Liberals to do it here. So the fossil fuel industry is alive and well in Canada. It's doing very well for itself. More and more, it's not passing that success on to workers because they're finding ways to do more of that work with less workers. And what we're seeing is that the oil and gas industry does not have anywhere near the companies, and the shareholders don't have the same loyalty to the workers that workers have shown to the industry. What New Democrats want is to build an industry and to have governments and public policy that are there for those workers as those companies find ways of moving on, even as they make money. And in time, as the world economy shifts to a lower carbon future, that those workers aren't left behind, but that they are players with skills that are valued and that people, not just in Canada, but across the world, want to hire them for in order to build out that new energy economy. So the path of denial really gets us nowhere. And for too long, Canada, under the Liberals, has been on a path of delay. And, what does that look like? Well, that looks like big investments in a pipeline, tens of billions of public dollars that had we started spending 5 or 6 years ago, Canada would be in a much more competitive position in relation to our peers in terms of generating good union jobs in the emerging sectors. I hear Conservatives often complain about the fact that Canada's productivity growth has not kept up with our competitors. Business investment in Canada has been stagnant for a long time now. Well, it's not because corporations haven't had access to capital. In fact, many Canadian companies have large capital reserves, and they've seen the corporate tax rate go down from 28 or 29% in the year 2000 to just 15% now. And all the while, as that corporate tax rate was being reduced, the argument that was being made for that, among others, was this tax reduction is going to allow Canadian companies to invest back into the Canadian economy. And that's not what they've been doing with the money. The new energy economy provides an opportunity in at least two ways to raise the level of business investment and raise the level of productivity. It's an opportunity for governments to make investments, for sure. We are starting to see some of that. Thankfully, the Biden administration in the U.S. provided real leadership on that. It wasn't until they provided that leadership that we saw the Liberals here really get going in a meaningful way on investments in the new energy economy. I think we're late to the table, and that's going to create challenges for Canada. But there's also a lot of private capital that wants to invest in renewables, and Canada has a lot going for it. If we can do it in the right way with Indigenous people instead of railroading them and railroading their rights to land and resources, I think Canada has a lot to offer in terms of natural resources. But we also have amazing workers with some awesome skills that I think can compete on the international stage and would be a reason why international investors want to come here. And they do want to come here, but they want certainty, and they want and that's part of having predictability. And when you see a conservative government like the government in Alberta win an election and then completely throw out plans for meaningful investment in renewables, what that says, conservatives like to talk a lot about how governments signal to the international community and the effects it can have on the economy. When you have a conservative government like that run one way and then the day after tear up major plans for investment in renewables, what that says to the international investment community is that you can't put your money in Canada because you don't know when the political winds change. And in fact, in this case, it wasn't even a change of government. It was just a government that got past the election test and figured, 4 years from now, we have another election. If we do this all now, maybe people will forget about it. They completely changed course. Well, how does that help Canada tell a credible story to international investors who want certainty and predictability on this front? So Canada's been delaying for too long. We're finally seeing some action from this government, but it's reactive and it's in response to the Biden administration in the U.S. Making the kinds of generational investments that ought to be made in the new energy economy in order to ensure that the United States has a serious foot in the door on that economy. Canada's got to get with the program, but there's more than one way to participate in the new energy economy. What we don't want to see as New Democrats is what we're starting to see in oil and gas, where workers are not at the center of this. They get talked about, but they don't have a seat at the table. And at the end of the day, where wealthy investors and shareholders are able to make extra money by screwing workers, they'll do it. We're seeing it in the oil and gas sector. It's not the way we want the renewable sector to be set up. And so this Sustainable Jobs Act, which is a product of some of what we forced the Liberals to agree to in the confidence and supply agreement, is an attempt to start building the infrastructure so that when we push past the denial and we get past delay, we don't end up with the third D, which is despair. People feeling that after all this, as we build the foundational infrastructure of a new energy economy, that there's no real room for workers there. That workers are being pushed into new industries with lower standards for pay and for working conditions. And the only way to prevent that is to put workers right at the table. Now, that's not just a defensive maneuver for workers to be able to advocate for the wages and the working conditions that they properly ought to have, but it's also an opportunity for Canadians, for public policy makers, and for investors to have the wisdom of people that know how to do these jobs at the table, to be able to evaluate various specific proposals about building particular things and to say, does this make sense? Is this going to work out? What are the challenges involved with that? Not just the challenges, the engineering challenges, because there are engineers for that, but to have people that are familiar with what it means to commute from Nova Scotia to Alberta to work on a project, be able to weigh in on how to get the human resources we need in order to build this new low carbon infrastructure is a really important part of the story. And I believe that having workers at the table isn't just good for workers, it's good for the projects to help understand how to staff those projects up in a way, particularly in a tight labor market, although I think this is true generally, how to do it in a way that's genuinely attractive to the kinds of workers who have the talent and the skills and the education and training that we need in order to make these projects a success. So, I talked a little bit about what I think is a terrible mistake in Alberta to turn away from building up the renewable energy economy. I think it's a decision that goes against the enterprising spirit of Peter Lougheed back in the 70s to set up an industry that would serve his province well for decades to come. The clean energy sector's GDP forecast is that it's economists believe it's set to grow by 58% by 2030. They're projecting only 9% growth in fossil fuels. So if we want to go where the jobs are, if we want to go where the money is, if we want to take Canada's economy to the places it needs to go to remain competitive and to continue providing good livelihoods for Canadian workers, that means investing in the clean energy sector and creating a policy environment that works for the clean energy sector and works for workers. In the United States, we've seen the private sector announce more than $110 billion in new clean energy manufacturing since the Investment Reduction Act was put into place. That's an incredible amount of investment, and that means an incredible amount of work for American workers. And we don't want Canadians to get left out of those opportunities. It doesn't make sense to have Canadians be left out of those opportunities. We're not, if the concern is about workers and if the concern is about the futures of families, as my colleague from Winnipeg Centre said, I think very wisely earlier, it's not that Canadian workers love the oil and gas sector. What they love is good employment. What they love are fair wages. What they love is to be able to put food on their table and to be able to afford a home. In the future, going forward, there are going to be a lot of opportunities to do exactly that. Put food on the table, afford a good home, have some financial security in clean energy jobs, or in what I call the new energy economy, and it's a lower carbon economy.
The honourable member, I've been trying to give him a couple of signals there that time is up, but he's been going to be able to add to during questions and comments, and we won't be able to get through all of the questions and comments during this period, but we'll try and do our best we can. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and to the Minister of Natural Resources.
I really enjoyed hearing the member opposite speaking, and what I really appreciated was the focus that he placed on the good-paying jobs that are going to be available to workers as we move towards a net zero economy and towards, building out the clean electrical grid. In that conversation, one of the points he raised was also the need for certainty, that we need to make sure that there is certainty and transparency as to how things are happening and what the plan is, planning ahead for workers to make sure that those good-paying jobs are there. And with this bill, there are requirements for action plans to be tabled, for there to be advice from a partnership council. I was wondering if he could elaborate on the importance for that kind of stability, and perhaps what he sees as the dangers to those good-paying jobs when he hears what the members from the official opposition are raising that would have radical changes in policies like carbon pricing.
Honourable Member for Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the question. Certainty is very important. That's certainly something we hear around the Finance Committee table. I've heard it around the International Trade Committee table as well. Investors are looking for a predictable public policy environment. And when we get governments that suddenly pull the rug out from under clean energy investments, what they do is that they make it harder to attract private capital. Frustrating in the case where you then have a party that turns around and says, well, government can't fund this transition all on its own. We need private capital too. Well, then why would you undermine the prerequisites for attracting private capital? But I would say certainty is important in another sense, because we need certainty for workers in this transition as well. That's why employment insurance reform is really important, and it's something we have to do with a mind to the energy transition, pension bridging opportunities, training for workers. All these things have to be built into a plan, and this act, again, not perfect, but is the beginning of creating some certainty, not just for international investors, but for workers about this transition, which is coming led by the market, if not led by governments.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Longueuil.
The honourable member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Well, I hear a lot from my NDP friends in this House. They talk very passionately about fighting climate change. They say they're pushing the Liberal government to stop investing in fossil fuels. They're saying we need to do more to fight greenhouse gas emissions. But unfortunately, when it comes time to act, one of the only things you can do in this House to fight the government is to vote against it. But in the last budget in 2023, billions of dollars were again sent to the oil and gas industry, for example, for carbon capture, which we know doesn't work. But our NDP friends supported the budget. So I'd like my colleague to explain that to me.
Elmwood Transcona.
Mon honorable collègue sait bien.
My honourable colleague knows very well that the NDP doesn't sit at the cabinet table. We do our work, criticizing the government and negotiating with the government. But they don't agree with us on all points. And constant elections would not lead to the appropriate conditions for addressing the climate crisis either. We are here to do our work. We do it. That includes criticizing the government, of course. But constant elections would not fix the problem.
We have time for one more question. The honourable members, South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Elmwood-Transcona for his wonderful speech. I'm glad he brought up, signals that this government is sending, signals that governments around the world are sending. 5 years ago, I was at a G20 meeting on energy. On the subject was this transition we're talking about today. And, Germany, Japan, Argentina, even China were talking about the need to move to renewables quickly. And Canada got up and said, we've built an oil pipeline and we'd like to build more natural gas pipelines. And it was a real face-smacking moment on the world stage. And workers can see that too. They see that this transition is happening, and I'm just wondering if the member can talk more about how we need to involve workers in this process.
The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
I want to thank my colleague very much for that question, and I think this is where that question of the 3Ds come in. I mean, workers do know that everyone can see it. No, you couldn't miss it this summer. That there are real problems that are beginning to happen as a result of climate change, and that they pose real threat to human life and safety, that they pose real threats to our property, and that they pose real threats to our economy. You can't get away from that. And so, what's on offer in terms of political alternatives? Well, there is a party that's offering the idea that we can just ignore it and maybe it'll go away. I think too often we've seen from this government a willingness just to say, yeah, that's important, we're going to get to it, and then they just keep kicking the can down the road. And in the face of that, it's easy to despair, to say, look, there's just what do we do? We don't see leadership from government. I think what we are starting to see is some leadership in the market. And that's because, thankfully, I think...
I'm sorry, the honourable member will have to continue his questions and comments the next time that this matter is before the House. I do apologize for having to interrupt him. He will have 4 minutes the next time that this matter is before the House for questions and comments. It being 1:30, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper. Conformément à l'article 91.1 du règlement, une affaire émanant des députés.
Pursuant to Standing Order 91.1, a private member's item may only be considered by the House after a final decision on the votable status of the item has been made.
Bill S-210, an act to restrict young persons' online access to sexually explicit material, is scheduled for debate in the House today. No report on the votable status of the bill has been presented and concurred in as is required before the bill can be debated. Je demande donc au...
I therefore direct the clerk to drop the item to the bottom of the order of precedence on the order paper. Private members' business will thus be suspended for today.
Accordingly, it being 1:31, the House stands adjourned until Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023 at 10 a.m. pursuant to Standing Orders 28.1 and 24.1. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.